Hello, everybody. It's another episode. We're in the den. More Bleach, more HotBoySpicy's here as well. Hello. It's
Hello,
HotBoySpicy.
everyone. It is me.
Oh, actually, this is really funny. So on my Google not my Google, my Windows search bar, there's actually peppers, like chili peppers, in the daily image for the. So I just looked at it. I was like, hey, wait a minute. I know a guy who represents his online persona through peppers.
The
A peppers.
even though I don't eat any spicy peppers. That's not any staple of my diet. Not even remotely close. Although I do love spicy food. So.
Okay, and I don't play Dwarf Fortress, so we're both frauds.
There we go. There we go.
Okay, we're doing another episode of Bleach. We're talking about more a bunch of Soul Society. Not all of it yet, but anyway. So comments. Haven't talked about comments in a while, but I specifically wanted to. I don't know if it'll be regular. Maybe, but with Bleach specifically, again, I wanted to have a better understanding of it, and Radman delivered. Because he gave us like one really long comment and then another sort of addendum where he just goes into a bunch of things relevant to what we're talking about. Like he fully breaks down Ichigo's Zanpakuto and how the mechanics of it work with information I technically had, but I just hadn't like gone back. Like one thing he mentioned was how Ishin was stealing away Ichigo's or Shiro and Ichigo like with it. That's why he lost his powers, and so Ichigo regaining his power, like he explains how Ishin got his powers back basically, because there's just so much that Bleach doesn't just explain to you, right? There's so much you kind of have to figure out on your own, and so having this just break it down and was just really nice, because I that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted to have an understanding of these little things that are in the manga that just again aren't directly spelled out to you.
And for you guys that don't know who Radman is, I've characterized him to crafts as essentially, at least as far as I know, I don't talk to many diehard Bleach fans, but this guy's like a Bleach scholar. Like I would consider myself like a Naruto scholar. This guy is like probably ahead of me on the Bleach category and being like a scholar of the series. He was in my DMs yesterday just feeding me some info. I feel like I'm cheating a little bit just because like we were talking about so much stuff that we haven't even read yet in the reread, but I still of course appreciated it. No, he's a really cool guy. Check out his channel. He makes a lot of anime videos. He's made a lot of JJK videos recently, I know, which speaking of that, we'll get to that in a second. I did post a tweet today, slightly inflammatory because I threw out a stray, but and Radman, I know you like because he's going to be watching this, so I know you like JJK a lot. I'm sorry for that, and he did reply on that tweet as well. But yeah, no, like it's really cool to see someone that's really into Bleach extrapolating on so much stuff that's not, explicitly fed to the audience. A lot of this stuff, even in the comment on this first video, I hadn't even thought of. Even something as simple as like, oh yeah, like Quincy's can make anything out of reishi. But like I never thought about that application for Ichigo in like the first chapter. Because you just don't think that early on about that stuff, given that the stuff we learn about.
No.
Yeah, especially because we learn more and more about Quincy's as we go on, to where even in the final arc, we're still learning new stuff about Quincy's. It's just not something you think of. It's not something I thought about, and we're rereading it. Like I have knowledge, going ahead until the end of the series. I didn't think about this crap. So, it's cool. It's cool. I hope to see more comments like this because it's just, for me, it's going to make me appreciate Kubo and Bleach more and more and more and more. And that's what this is all about, right? So.
Mm-hmm. Also, yeah. I looked at his channel, and yeah, he has a shitload of Bleach videos. He also has more subs from me, so all of my, oh, cool, this guy has turned into resentment. No, I'm kidding. I just thought it was funny that, oh yeah, it's literally like, I have 29.2K, he has 29.3K. It's literally peanuts. So
yeah, no, dude, I feel like just a few months ago, he was still below me in subscribers. He's jumping up. He's on the grind, hey.
Mm-hmm. I mean, his
shout
fucking
outs to my man.
Jujutsu Kaisen video has like fucking, it's more views than any of my videos. So
nice, yeah,
which is cool. I haven't happened to watched any of the videos yet. I did have one linked to me because on Togashi's art in Hunter x Hunter, specifically the manga, and I was interested in that one because I was going to talk about that as a smaller part in a much larger video, and so I would want to watch that one because I still want to make that video one day. But anyway, I did have another comment I want to talk about because I replied to it. Basically, Antoinette Fuller mentions how talks about in the novel how Ichika got her name, which is good. That's cool. I like it. Except I dislike the way that they kind of frame their argument, because it's like Ichika, the first kanji in her name is literally strawberry. Ichigo, a billion fucking times in the manga, is called Strawberry. Like, and even just the fact that am I crazy for making that connection? It feels not crazy to me.
No, I mean, I don't think so either. But maybe this is just a. I mean, I was reading it, and honestly, I skimmed through it. I was more paying attention to Radman's comment. Skimming through this, it looks like one of those occasions. I get comments like these all the time, where it's like, "Well, Hot Boy, I think it's more this way," and it's like, "Well, why can't it be like both ways? Like you can both observations.
Yeah,
both observations can be correct, and they don't necessarily negate the other, right? Like, skimming through it, that's the kind of vibe I got from it. It seems like a lot of
and that's exactly what I responded with. I say, like, they aren't mutually exclusive, right? Like, it can be both, and the fact, they enhance each other too, because they go on to talk about how, like, all these other characters gifted, they gifted Rukia these flowers and tied it, sewed them to her wedding veil, and it's like, yeah, of all the flowers in the world that they could have picked, that they like. The single flower that references the main character, the one who all of these characters, including Rukia, also care a lot about. Like, did Kubo, and because the author of the book was, maybe I just assumed. Never mind. But it's like, did they just not think about it? Like, that's just, it's so baffling to me, just that kind of response, because it's so like, because I got another response like that too, because in my Aizen video I talk about how, like, Ichigo's sword is Zangetsu. It means like moon cutter, and so you have, like, I mentioned how, because Aizen's like he's like an illusory moon, and Ichigo cuts through that. Well, and then someone's like, "Oh, but actually, Yuabak's the moon. He cuts through the moon," and it's like, it's both. Yes, like, Aizen is a fake moon. Yuabak is the real moon. Ichigo cuts through both of them. It's like, what? Why can't it be both? I just don't understand. You can have. It's not even like, because sometimes, like, I think it happened with American Psycho, and I talked about that, and I gave my interpretation of the movie. I mean, I was being a pretty harsh, and in retrospect, I was wrong. But, like, you can have multiple interpretations that don't work with each other too. Right? Like, you can have two different readings of a movie that's deliberately vague, that has vagueness on, purpose, and be like, well, even if they, there are two different readings in the movie that don't work with each other, like, they can still both be interesting readings and valuable, right? Like, that's kind of how I feel about it. But this isn't that. This is like two readings that work together perfectly, and yet somehow one of them supersedes the other because it's directly stated, and the other one isn't stated, but is kind of really obvious to me that if I feel like I almost shouldn't need to state it.
Oh my god, you know what? Because this is a Bleach comment. You know what? I can probably, and if I don't find it in like less than a minute, then I'm just going to try to remember it off rip, because I got a comment just like this on my Bleach video. And it was in regards to Aizen and Tosen's relationship, because I kind of talk like very, very brief, like by very brief, I mean, I think I mentioned it like in 10 seconds of that video. It's very, very brief mention, but someone had some contention. Multiple people. It's just one of the threads got pretty lengthy because I was actually responding to it. Let me see here. If I can find it, I'll find the thread. Actually, as for Tosen, it's revealed that Aizen killing him was a mercy kill. Tosen specifically asked Aizen to kill him should he get turned back over to the Shinigami side. And I responded, the light novel actually reinforces what I say in this video. In the scene where Aizen recollects on Tosen, there's no emotional weight behind his words. It's all a matter of fact, so much so that it sounds taunting. Aizen admired Tosen's purity, but he never says anything that alludes to him viewing Tosen as a peer. He admired Tosen, did what Tosen himself wished, and swiftly moved on. This was not the case with Gin. So again, the question still remains. Why the distinction? The mercy kill is irrelevant to the specific point I'm making in this video. Okay, so you obviously have to have a little bit of the context of what I'm saying in the video, but essentially, I think what I was saying in the video was that Aizen sort of almost disregards Tosen, whereas it's a complete 180 with Gin, where it's like there's this, there's this like visceral cry of like anguish with Gin, and there's a huge distinction. But this person, of course, was saying that Aizen seemed to be acknowledging Tosin and wanting the best for Tosin, but it's like, well, you can obviously tell there's a huge dynamic difference between Aizen and Gin and Aizen and Tosin just in the reaction. But even in the context of the scene, I actually read that specific scene just because I was so curious, because I didn't even know this novel existed until this comment. But the entire time, like even what's his name, Hisagi, is that his name, right?
Yes.
The 69 guy, yeah. Even he was getting upset because of the way Aizen was recounting Tosin, because it did feel almost taunting the way he was, like, it was so matter of fact, no emotion behind Aizen's words at all. So yeah, and I'd be interested to reread that scene again and see if I have maybe I'd agree with this person now. But it's one of those things. I feel it's like I understand where some people are coming from with when you're trying to get like I don't think it's this way, but sometimes it's like, well, your observation can be valid, but mine too. And in this case, it's a little bit different because I think their observation kind of goes against mine, and that's like, oh no, because I think what they're trying to say with this comment is that Aizen cared just as much for his relationship with Tosin that he as Gin, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. At least from what I remember me feeling back then, I didn't necessarily think that was the case. I think for Tosin, Aizen's connection was about like it was with some of his most acknowledged peers, like someone like, for instance, Urahara. Right, like someone he can respect, but never someone he can stand next to. And in the video I was saying, like, again, he saw someone with the potential to stand next to him, yada yada yada. Anywho, that was very lengthy, but yes, these comments sometimes, and I will say, I do love dissenting comments, especially when they're when they're valid. Like I love it. It's just generally, like you were saying, Crafts. Generally, it's like, they'll come up with their own observation. It's like, well, yeah, but these two can operate together. That's fine, and it's fine ultimately. But,
right, like that's kind of where I'm thinking about it from. Is like, okay, yeah, sure, disagree, but again, in this case, it's like, well, what are you disagreeing about, and what does that like? What is like? I'm saying this thing is true. They're saying, well, actually, this thing is true. Then I go, well, both things are true, and they're like, no, my thing is more true. And it's like, but they're both. I didn't say. It's
you gotta hit them up with a what is
discussion. Right, it's just not a constructive discussion, and that's what we want ultimately, right? Like, because just a dismissive point, for instance, not saying this person is being dismissive. Oh, they kind of are being dismissive of what I'm saying. But like a dismissive point isn't interesting, right? Like, we want good like this person wasn't bringing up, they're disagreeing with you, wasn't dismissing your point. Well, I mean, they were kind of not talking. Or I don't know. It's like I have a whole different take on it, honestly, because I think the issue is that like Aizen showing compassion to someone and like, yeah, mercy killing Tosen because that might be better for him, or that's what he wanted, right? And seeing him as an equal to Gin, like those aren't mutually exclusive. Both can be true, right?
Yeah.
Because I think, again, I mentioned Aizen Myo and an angry but compassionate god, and I do think Aizen is like I do legitimately think that what Aizen is doing, he legitimately believes it's for the best for everyone involved. Which is kind of, maybe not everyone, because there's a lot of pawns, there's a lot of people who are just weak and disposed of, but I do think what he's doing, he ultimately thinks is good. Now, do I agree? No, we'll dig into Aizen. If not, probably more next reading, because I think he has a really good role in this one too. I don't know. It's really interesting. I guess we'll get into the discussion a bit, because moving on from comments and just I don't know, we'll talk about Aizen as a starting talking point, because just personally, Aizen is probably like the single most interesting thing about Bleach for me, because I think there's so many good, interesting things about it, but I feel like with Aizen, just because again, Kubo as an author does all these things and lets the audience put things together. So and Aizen specifically is a character about illusions and but while also trying to be in control. And I think, the layers that adds just some interesting layers to his character that even in this reading, I like the way Momo sort of takes after him and believes she's following his will, and just like knowing what his deal is, and then seeing everything like sort of build up, and just like how his death is so major and how it affects like how the people in Soul Society are acting, and it's interesting seeing those seeds being planted in regards to his character. Because I will say one of those things I got out of Bleach before I watched like 20 episodes and then I dropped it like in high school or after high school, but I knew about Aizen because his like death and rebirth were so shocking to people at the time. Like it was just major, like, holy fuck, Bleach Soul Society is the best arc. It's kind of hard to avoid that. So it's like I knew about Aizen going into the manga. And he's still really fucking good. So, but yeah, I don't know if you had anything to add, because admittedly we don't have that much with Aizen at this point.
Yeah, we don't. But the stuff that we do have is already pretty cool, because you see even this early on, there's a lot of stuff that, not a lot, but there's at least a couple of things that should be blatantly obvious to all of these Soul Reapers, if they had the appropriate wherewithal to really act on these oddities. Number one is Gin's hyper transparency with having some malevolent plan. Like, it's so transparent that something. So the scene I think of when I think of this phenomenon is with Hitsugaya. Hitsugaya like acknowledges with the letter and with is her name Momo, right?
Momo, yes.
Momo. Okay, yeah. I really got to get better with the names. I know most names, but
there's so many fucking
names,
characters.
Yeah. Momo, because like even Hitsugaya says like Momo, like this should be obvious. Like that's not Aizen, and it's there's a little bit of irony there in that, like, well, it's not Aizen, but the Aizen is also not Aizen, right?
Yeah, right.
But, the funny thing is you can throw that same line of reasoning right on Gin. Like, one of the pivotal scenes that kind of started this causal chain is when Aizen and Gin are having their conversation, and Gin in front of all the captains says like, oh, you won't hear those bells next time, right? You won't hear that ringing next time. And it's like, this is like, if the Soul Reapers had that level of agency to understand, or had that level of what I guess what's the word for it? It's stagnation that's bred from
there's definitely like an ignorance, like a lack of desire to challenge.
Yes.
Well, because like I especially think of Yamamoto, where it's like, he's created this piece and he's so desperate to uphold it that he's created this hierarchy of conformity and like you said, stagnance, and it's comfortable. Like, peace is comfortable. I can see why it's a desirable result, but it's gone to the point where they so clearly refuse to,
and I think I think I used the phrase actually in my Soul Society video. Stagnant fragility is the phrase I use. But what's cooler about that, rather than the stagnant fragility in of itself, is it's Aizen's playing around with it. He doesn't just manipulate it, but he actively puts down breadcrumbs to say like, hey guys, I'm giving you an opportunity here. Like, please look here and decipher this. I'm not going to make it easy for you, but at the same time, I'm going to drop hints so that maybe like, and honestly, there's varied interpretations that can come from just this. Is this part of Aizen's like camaraderie he still holds for some of these people? Did he never have any camaraderie for these people?
So it's funny you bring that up, because I was literally thinking. So there was a really good post on Reddit. There's a little irony to it too. I'll explain, but it basically breaks down how Aizen's character is a huge reference to a lot of Nietzschean philosophy. Friedrich Nietzsche. I don't actually know how to fully pronounce his name. So some examples of some phrases that you might have heard that are related to him are like, one is like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's I guess a twisted, or that it comes from his ideology.
I honestly didn't even know that was Nietzsche. Honestly, I know who Nietzsche is, and I know some of his philosophy.
And then obviously, But okay, yeah, and I think the other one is he really hated Christianity. So I think like some of the like even though the Soul Society isn't directly related to like Christianity, they do have they do have a god, the Soul King. They and they have this same kind of like mentality of just accepting things as they are without thinking of like change. Like that's kind of what he hated about Christians, I believe. But so how Aizen evokes that mentality is that so one of his ideals is basically like I think it's in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, but basically it's like being grateful or thankful to your enemies because your enemies make you stronger. Because like if because you have to overcome and so Aizen
and he never had like true adversity, and this is something. Oh, that's so cool. Because this is something
right,
I literally
like
mentioned
just this
in
one thing is you're like boom, oh
yeah,
my god.
yeah. Because this is something. Well, now, like, no, it's not even literally me gaining any new knowledge. It's me rekindling old knowledge that I had in the past. But I just am forgetting. I literally have in my video like Aizen, not the Soul Society video, but the one over the Arankar saga, Ichigo versus Aizen. I say like Aizen never found himself. He never found himself a true foe on equivocal ground on every cylinder. So like, if he matched them in shrewdness, he would overpower them. For instance, with someone like, dude, I'm like, I need to remember these
Urahara
names.
or Shinji.
Shinji. If he matched him in shrewdness, he could overpower him. If he matched him in intellect, he could outmaneuver them. Urahara, right, or overpower. Like if he matched him in power, you think of you think of Yamamoto. Like Yamamoto could maybe match him in power, but what Aizen has over him is his level of intellect and shrewdness. So like he was never matched on every cylinder. He could always find a way to completely dismantle an opponent, and I think that's so cool to see. And it's something I picked up on in my reading of Bleach, is that it's really cool to look at these matchups Aizen goes against sometimes, like because even the little scenes with Shinji being able to reveal Aizen with spine, like is really I think is more telling than simply that like, oh, these other people are also like have assets of their own that make them strong individuals. It's not necessarily that Aizen is above all these other people, but that observation becomes way cooler when you realize that like, oh, but even if Shinji can do this, like Aizen can still completely dismantle this guy with power alone. And it's just really cool to look at it like that. Because especially when you look at the final fight with Ichigo and Aizen, where literally on every level, Ichigo has him. And even on the intellect part with the planning ahead, right? So it is. There's
really so many layers to Ichigo and Aizen. But to finish my thought is what I was kind of getting at is Aizen, I think, deliberately frames himself as an enemy. He wants people to challenge him, but he also, in being an enemy, he is a chance for those he opposes to get stronger. And I do think he, like I said, I think he wants what's best for those against. Like I think like with the fact that he had the conversation with Gin, right? He's working with Gin. They're allies. Like if he just wants this plan to go through, there's no reason for them to do that, right? But they're basically testing Kitsugaya. Can he, this youthful guy, overcome, his own, because he's like,
that's a really
Gin's
cool,
the bad guy,
that's a cool addition, because it's not just that he's a captain, it's also that he is the youngest captain. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and then with Momo is because what I realized. So chapter -17 was interesting because you have you also have these three, Izuru, Momo, and Renji, these three youthful characters who they go against their orders, right? They were told to retreat, and they're like, no, we don't want to see our Momo was the one leading the charge. She's the one who's like, I don't want to see my comrades die in front of me. I'm going to fight even though I'm completely outmatched, right?
Yeah.
So what we see with Momo, especially comparing it to her reaction to Aizen and his death, is she's willing to go against rules and systems, but she exclusively does so regarding to her personal feelings, right? Like, I don't want to see people die in front of me. I fucking love Captain Aizen. I would literally die for him, and I will do whatever I think is right based on what he says or does or thinks because I love him.
Oh, crap.
Yes.
And I don't even know. You might have already realized just talking about this.
I might have been going into it, but what are you going to say?
This completely matches what you were just saying earlier about like the Aizen philosophy, which is the Nietzsche philosophy of like, having this sort of faith is very can be a lot of the times a detriment. For Momo, it's her unyielding faith in her comrades,
and especially Aizen too,
yeah,
right?
and
Like
Aizen, because yeah,
yes,
but,
right by yeah. Sorry, you go ahead.
and I mean, I guess you could look at it in a way, in the same way he was testing Hitsugaya, maybe he's testing Momo. But
no, I absolutely think that's the case, because it's, again, we as the reader see the obvious solution. For Momo, she just has to give up, like, stop thinking so positive of Aizen, but she can't. She just has such strong feelings for him. Like, I remember there was one of those moments that stuck with me is during the Fake Car Kuratown stuff. Rangiku mentions that, oh, Momo's still referring to him as Captain Aizen, even though she's like, she thinks she's resolved against him. She's like, no, she isn't. She still cares about him so fucking much that, like, she still sees him as her superior, even though he's long since abandoned Soul Society and literally stabbed her.
Yeah.
As we see in the next, we'll see in the next reading. Like, again, there's no and what she's holding on to is, again, this reflection in the water, this, illusion. It's the Glass's Aizen isn't real. It is completely a construct made to challenge Soul Society and to live among, to lie and live among them. And oh boy, so it's just, and it's, and even just thinking about how, like, the way, like, Hitsugaya and Momo fight, and then, like, he literally, like, in art, like, one of the most memed panels of Bleach is when Hitsugaya stabs Momo in the Fake Car Kuratown because they were caught up in Aizen's illusion, and just he's just such a piece of shit because but they're not able to even his whole power is just really symbolic of the fact that he does work with these illusions, and all these characters have this preconception of Aizen based on who they thought they knew. So he's able to trap them in their illusions, but Ichigo didn't know Aizen. That's why. So his illusions don't work on Ichigo. Which is just so it's just so.
But it did, right? Fate Katakura Town. That illusion worked for a while. For a while, until
true,
of course.
True, but his power literally doesn't work on Ichigo. Yes.
And well, I mean, even symbolically with Hitsugaya and Momo in that moment where he stabs her, it's like these are the two people that were essentially being tested by Aizen the most, the youngest people, the ones that essentially he put a lot of faith in. Ironic. He put maybe some embers of faith in, and maybe that there's some level of potential for growth here that could help foster a new soul society, per se, but. That well, I
think you say those because I think the
but
other.
the new Soul Society does happen, right? With Ichigo, right? So
yes, exactly right. But I would also say because I think he's also testing Renji, because like one of the things I think I opened my video talking about how literally the first thing we see Aizen do in the manga is talking to Renji and being like, "Hey, isn't it weird that all this shit about Rukia and her execution? Your childhood friend, like the person here in this entire fucking dimension that you care the most about." That's odd. Like, he's literally basically, and I think he even comments on Renji being a problem child at one point. Maybe it's in the next reading, but like he recognizes again Renji, like, and Renji is able to go against orders, and he is someone who might challenge. He's he does the same thing with Shinji in Turn Back the Pendulum, I think, where he's talking about all the weird murders that are happening, like that he's doing. Like he's literally just fucking dangling it in their fucking faces. He's such a piece of shit. I love Aizen so fucking much.
I've said before that Aizen is my. He's still my favorite antagonist in the series. I'm not sure about favorite. Maybe by the end of this reread, my favorite character. We'll see. But
yeah, I can confidently say he's like the most interesting character to me. But because I look, there's a reason I'm going to do another video on Aizen, because I already have the one. And my other one's going to be. It's also going to be on Arankar and all the Espada. It's going to be pretty ambitious. But Aizen's so good.
Very good, yeah. It's crazy as we're talking so much about him, and there's his role in this. I mean, it's pivotal, his role already in the Soul Society before the revelation that he's even alive is. But a lot of that is just to do, of course, we have the power of we have retrospect. We're retrospectively looking at the series, but I do want to mention while we're talking about the appreciation for Soul Society when we're looking at it. I think when I first read it a couple years back, Soul Society was like at the bottom of my list, below even Substitute Shinigami. Now I think Soul Society is like for sure above it for me. And I think a lot of that is to do, and we were talking about it, me and Crafts were before we hit record, is that a lot of it I think is to do is I have like a newfound appreciation for the majority of these fights that take place in Soul Society. Not as much something like Ichigo versus Kenpachi, but for all the other fights I've garnered, especially, and we'll get into that, Uryu versus
Kurotsuchi.
Yeah. That fight, I picked up on some interesting things, albeit the thoughts haven't reached like an ultimate conclusion yet. They're just some observations that I picked up on that I thought were really, really interesting. Yeah,
I'm curious because I also walked away from that fight with more, but I'll go ahead. Let's jump into that next because
okay.
we'll just go.
So let me see here because I wrote some general notes down on it. So the first thing is literally immediately when we jump into Uryu's flashback. It's really cool. Uryu's father says something interesting, which gets into the idea of him being a doctor. He says, "Your time would be better spent learning to save the living." And I immediately think, because he couldn't save Uryu's mother from her fate, right? From like her you could say, because Reishi is like spirit energy, from like her spiritual fate, he couldn't save her. So he decides to essentially, his way of coping with that is saving the living, right? Automatically I was thinking, that's really cool. And then another thing that kind of relates to this that he says in that short little scene we see of, I think his name's Ryukin, right? Ryokin.
You mean Grandpa?
Is it?
Hold on. Which
is Ishida? What is Ishida's father's name?
Oh, Ishin.
Is Ishin? Am I confused? I thought Ishin was Ichigo's dad. Am I stupid?
Oh, didn't you just say that?
Did I say Ichigo
I thought you asked me who Ichigo's dad was. I was very confused as
to Ishida.
Yeah. Yes, Ryuken is his dad.
Ryuken. Okay, I just want to make sure I was getting the name right. I'm really bad with names.
His father, the grandpa, is Soken. So
Soken. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why I've stopped, because I used to just call him Ishida instead of Uryu, but then it's like, well, he's got family members, so I kind of got to talk about him in the way that he's identifiable.
Okay.
So go ahead.
But another thing that's really interesting is Uryu asks. Ryukin, like, why do you hate Quincy? Like, why don't you want to be a Quincy? And he says, because there's no profit in them. And I immediately, when I read that line, I immediately related it to Yuhabaha and what he does. He literally robs the Quincy's of their life for his own end. I.e., there is no profit in them because you're literally being robbed of all agency, of all your powers, of your very life. Whenever your ultimate fate as a Quincy is to be in full servitude of Yuhabaha, even at the expense of your livelihood. So when I read the line, because there's no profit in them, I was like, well, I connect that immediately to the ultimate fate of a Quincy who's subservient to Yuhabaha. I'm like, that's so fucking cool. And I was just like, he's right. Like, I cannot blame him for this mindset because he's just right. That is like, as long as Yuhabaha exists or will exist again, that's true. Mm-hmm. There is no profit in them. You'll get robbed of everything, essentially.
Yeah, I like that.
And then I guess talking about the fight itself. Uryu says something interesting in the fight. He says that. So we get a little flashback. We get more of the flashback with Soken because that's only like the beginning of the flashback where you see him and his father talking about that. He talks about Quincy's with Soken, and Soken's essentially explaining to him like, "Hey, one day, you'll essentially find your reason to fight." And Uryu, I wish I had the quote. I don't know why I didn't fucking write down the quote. I need to get better about taking notes in general.
It wasn't the quote about Soken's a battle you can't avoid, right? Or was it more than that?
Yeah, so it was related to that, but he says something right before that, and I wish I fucking wrote it down because it's essential to what I was gonna say. While I'm looking for this,
it was
go ahead and say what you were going to say, because this is...
Okay, so I guess to bring up some points I had about, well, I was more focused on, I guess, Kurotsuchi himself and how he relates to Uryu.
That's interesting.
He's just a humongous piece of shit, and I love him. I mean, it's the fuck. I was feeling a little bit when he was murdering those goons, because Kubo just really drove the emotions in with, like, first, like, they died horrifically, and then we see a chapter where it's like, oh, I'm a new Soul Reaper, I'm a sweet little boy, oh no, I'm dying horribly. I was like, ah. And, like, just the fact that he has his arm, like, extends, but he's like, it's like, one, it's gruesome as fuck because his arm is literally splitting apart and spurting fucking blood everywhere, and he's like, oh, that's really impractical, and I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you? I love him.
He's great.
He's great. He's so horrible. But what I realized about him is because he's a fucking doctor, right? He's basically what Uryu thinks his dad is, right? Because someone who just has no value in human life. His profit is intelligence, knowledge, basically, right? Rather than monetary profit, and he's willing to, like, he's literally bargaining with Uryu about, like, dissecting him and Orihime, right? Like, he's just completely and utterly, like, everything Uryu doesn't want to be by not being a doctor, right? Because he doesn't understand his dad, he doesn't understand what he's doing as a doctor and how that's relevant to, like, because obviously he overcomes this and he does become a doctor, but I hadn't clicked it together before that, oh, Kurotsuchi is literally, like, everything he doesn't want to be. He's literally what he thinks his dad is, and just so him fighting, and fighting Kurotsuchi is also, fighting that sort of perception in a sense. And also, I was also, for anyone who doesn't know about the sort of some of the real life historical context for Kurotsuchi, is because, like, well, even just, like, the fact that he's so horrifically evil, yet he's also just, like, a high ranking member of Soul Society, is just like, because remember, the Quincy's are all here. They are living in Soul Society secretly, in the Hidden City, like, and this guy who dissected and tortured and dozens to hundreds of Quincy's is just, like, still here and still alive, right? Like, I'm just trying to think about, like, man, how much, like, yeah, no wonder they fucking went to war. But for some historical context, there's a Unit 731. Have you heard of that?
No, I have not.
So Unit 731 was a Japanese military science unit that was stationed in China during World War II. And they did a bunch of horrific human experimentation that directly killed thousands, indirectly through some of the biological weapons they developed, probably killed hundreds of thousands. They were basically pardoned after World War II by America because they got a lot of valuable data. Like, I'm pretty sure one of the ones that I heard related to this was the rule of threes, which was humans can live 3 minutes without oxygen, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. They found that out by literally just letting people starve or suffocate and just taking data, basically. So that's the real life historical, basically Japanese war crimes that inspired characters like not just Kurotsuchi but also Orochimaru. Because at the end of Naruto, he's basically, like, he's under house arrest, but he's still, like, around and doing things, right?
Okay.
Because it's like both of these stories involve war, and so that's just something else that I figured.
I didn't know that historical context, but that adds another layer to it of meaning, especially when you get a lot of these comments that say stuff like, why are they still being treated, semi-fairly? I think even Radman was mentioning that a lot of people had a lot of qualms with the way Kurotsuchi is treated by the end of Bleach to the story, as if, like, all the atrocities he committed are essentially forgotten about and pardoned. It's, I guess, the same with Orochimaru and Naruto.
Right. But it's sadly just reality. Like, that's what you're angry about, right?
Yeah,
so, and you should be angry. Horrific things happen in reality all the time. And, anyway, did you remember what you were there? Did you pull up?
So, I pulled up the chapter. I haven't gotten to the specific part I was just talking about, but it did remind me of another thing I saw, and I took note of, at least in my head. Should have just written it down, though, of course. But there's this panel. It's just Uryu crying, saying, "I want to be a powerful Quincy and protect everyone from the Hollows." And it's like, immediately I think back to Orihime, when she's first kind of sizing up Uryu in Substitute Shinigami. She says that Uryu and Ichigo are like a lot alike. And when I look at this panel, it screams Ichigo. It's like, I want to be able to protect the people. I want to have the power to protect, right? They are a lot alike. It is like their origins, their deepest origins are rooted around this desire coming about from like a lack of, a lack of ability to do anything for, people that, these young lads, they don't need to care about, but, they have just so much benevolence in them. They do care about them. And it's cool to see that that through line being perpetuated here with Uryu as a kid. It's like, because I immediately think back to, and it's probably just because it's fresh on my mind because we've been reading this pretty fast. I thought of that scene. I was like, oh, they are a lot alike. You can see it right here. But moving on in the flashback, his grandfather says, you'll find out in time what you want to protect, right? And Uryu essentially makes a concession here whenever he's unleashing his power. He says, oh, grandfather, I haven't necessarily found out what I want to protect, but I know what I can't allow. But like, it's funny too, because he does know what he wants to protect, because there's someone behind him, even in this very scene, that Kurotsuchi just said before this new dialogue that he was going to experiment on. It was Orihime, right? Orihime is in grave danger if Uryu does not fight this guy. So while he's thinking one thing and and saying something else as well, we know essentially why he's making this sacrifice. It's because he's protecting his comrades. He's here to save Rukia too. It's more of this like tsundere thing I said last time that even Ichigo portrayed at the beginning of the series in his dialogue with Rukia about how like, I'm not going to go around saving everyone, yada, yada, yada. And he wasn't taking his Soul Reaper duty seriously. But in reality, we know, especially from that point whatever flashback that we'll get to eventually, I don't remember where it comes in, where Ichigo for the longest time has wanted the power to save people, to save spirits he doesn't know personally. He's always wanted that power. He's always wanted that ability. And Uryu is just the same. And it's cool to see that being illustrated so effectively here. But again, this is what I love about Bleach, is there's enough subtlety here that requires some level of like interpretation, like some level of like, you got to recall. It doesn't like spell it out. There's not a flashback that showcases Uryu like, or not a flashback that's showing Orihime goes like, oh, you and Ichigo are a lot alike. Like, you just have to remember that, right? It's the stuff I really appreciate about Bleach, because even Naruto sometimes falls prey to that, especially in as much as I love the Fourth Great Ninja War arc, sometimes it plays a little bit too much into explaining the themes. I know one of my other favorite series, Gintama, does that sometimes as well. And
I mean, my stance on that is like, one, these are literally stories made to be accessible to younger viewers, right? And
of course,
a lot of my favorite stories are aimed at not only this audience but even younger, and I'm fine with it being direct, because even when something like Naruto or One Piece has very clear things going on, right, like through like very direct symbolism, like or whatnot, like how do you don't walk away from One Piece and thinking, maybe the Heavenly Dragons were the good guys, right, because they're so horrifically evil, like it's not really very subtle, right, but there's still interesting things to read into when you go in deeper. But Bleach has those, but it like has the more so it has stuff that it directly states, like it literally ends the last chapter talking about courage, right? But it does have so much that's left unstated, and I think that's really cool. And because I was even just thinking about how I only just thought of it now, but like just the fact that you're talking about Ichigo and Uryu are really similar. They also both lose their powers, right? Like Uryu gives up his powers here.
That's exactly what I was segueing into. And, you stole it from me.
Maybe if you have something more to say, I was just gonna notice it, and I don't have any takeaways from like how similar or different those moments are. But it is interesting that Uryu is like willing to give up those powers at this point, where Ichigo like does it later. And I feel like, I don't know, Ichigo, he really, really wants those powers. Like maybe even like, because it takes a lot for him to give them up in a sense. But maybe I'm just not remembering as well. So
it does. And I mean that goes into even how Ichigo needlessly extends the fight with Aizen, is because there's a lot of reluctance there for him. Whereas Uryu, it's very quick. It's a very quick decision. And that might go into his... I mean, he's got a lot of pride in it. I haven't really thought much about that and the distinction there. I know why it's the case for Ichigo, but I guess I haven't thought enough about Uryu and why he is so quick to do it. Because what I was getting to when I was talking about like how he's thinking one thing, but the answer is actually a lot more simple and obvious, is that like he is essentially adhering to what he was telling his grandfather as a kid, is like, I just want to, have the power to protect others. Well, that's the reason he's doing that now, and that's reason enough to sacrifice so much here. But what I was thinking was it's synonymous, because again, we even talked about in last episode how Ichigo with the final Getsuga Tensho, what's behind him. At the end of the day, there's reluctance there, but that thought, and immediately he's ready to give it all up. His pride as a Shinigami, his powers, everything that makes him him, he gives up. And in this moment, I even have in my notes, literally all my note is like, Uryu does the final Getsuga Tensho before Ichigo. That is so cool. I never noticed that before. That's literally all I wrote on the notes for this. Is it's like the same concept, because Urahime is is behind him. She's being threatened by this guy. Uryu sees Urahime as a friend. He's here to also save Rukia. This guy is a wall in their way, one of the many walls in their way, but a wall nonetheless. He's one of the captains. Mm-hmm. It goes hand in hand with the final. And I had never thought about that before. I thought that was so cool that he's essentially doing the same thing Ichigo does way later on, but he predates Ichigo. So yeah, they are just a lot alike, and it's so cool to see that. And this goes even further, because I noticed even after this fight concludes, Uryu does something super Ichigo, which is almost uncharacteristic of Uryu, given that we know him to be a little bit more tactful than Ichigo, a little bit more aware of his surroundings. Uryu, completely beaten, battered. He's even thinking in the moment. He's like, "Man, my soul, my energy is about to completely run out. Like I'm losing my powers as a Quincy as we speak." What's he doing? He's climbing the steps to where Rukia is, as if he's not expecting some new threat. Of course there's going to be a new threat coming. But what is Uryu doing? He's doing something very Ichigo. Like, even with wounds, the only thing on his mind is like, got to go rescue Rukia. And not just that, but he's thinking of like the potential happiness they could all have by being reunited. That's the only thing flooding his mind, to the point where it's blinding him of like, the glaring reality. That is, when he finishes his ascent up these steps, there's just going to be another captain. And I thought that was because they're just so Ichigo. I mean, Ichigo, literally, right before this, what do we see with Ichigo? No, this is right. I think this actually happens after this. But with Ichigo and Byakuya, before they actually have their actual final fight, Ichigo with these wounds and with Yoruichi, he's like, oh no, they're in danger. In reference to Four Squad Kid and his name's Ganju, right?
Oh, Yamada.
Yes.
Ganju and Yamada. Yeah.
Ganju and Yamada. He senses that they're in imminent danger, and what does he do with the wounds? He goes right to them. He doesn't think about anything else. He goes right to them. And again, it's like a complete parallel. And I think that's so cool, because every step of the way, Uryu is like mirroring Ichigo in his actions, and it's very, very cool to see. And I picked up on all that, albeit, again, especially with the final Getsuga Tensho stuff and how there's kind of a parallel there. I haven't really brought that to its thematic conclusion yet. I haven't thought enough about it, because I literally read this last night right before I finished last night's reading up with ending this fight and Uryu climbing the steps and getting bodied by Tosen. But cool stuff. Cool stuff.
Shoot, I have like I feel like I have three different things I could like. Oh, you were talking about this aspect, so I'll go in this direction. And it's like, okay, well, which one do I do first? One thing I was thinking about is how I guess a difference between Uryu's fight with Kurotsuchi, where he gives up his powers, and Ichigo's later fight with Aizen, sort of relates to how vengeance is handled in Bleach. Because you can also in this reading compare it to Kaien, where like Kaien loses his wife, and so he goes to fight the Hollow, and he fights the Hollow alone, and what happens? He fucking gets possessed, and now Rukia, who is like, I'm gonna stay away from this because Ukitake is telling me, about pride and honor and all that.
Oh, there are two types of battles. Yeah.
Right, and it completely, so, yeah, sure, Kaien gets his pride, but ultimately, Rukia protects his pride by staying out of the fight and then killing him after he gets possessed. And there's just a very recurring thing with vengeance not generally turning out well, especially when the person acting out the vengeance is acting alone. And I think that's one difference between Ichigo and Uryu, because Uryu, like, Kurotsuchi was literally the one responsible for Soken's death. He held the Soul Reapers back on purpose so that Soken could die, so he could, examine the corpse, right?
Yeah.
And so Uryu unleashes all of his power to kill the one who resulted in the death of his grandfather. But he loses his powers, and Kurotsuchi survives, right? Like, he doesn't die. So ultimately, like, that desire for vengeance kind of doesn't accomplish, he's able to stop Kurotsuchi in the moment, and that's still really important. Like, what he's fighting for still matters in that way, but his own personal vendetta doesn't make progress, if that makes sense. And,
actually, I would actually go in a little bit of different direction here, actually. I'm glad you mentioned Kaien. What I would say is, with Kaien, he inadvertently caused Rukia to suffer so much from his selfish desire of vengeance.
Not even just Rukia, but Ganju and Kukaku. I think that's her name.
So there wasn't any... While he does end up leaving her with his heart, before that, he wounds it a great deal, right?
Yes.
Whereas Uryu, like, the distinction with Uryu is that heart, he never plunged any sort of sword into that heart, because ultimately, while he may even internally monologue things that are separate from his comrades, ultimately his actions only show, and even his thoughts post fight only show, that ultimately his comrades are always in his heart, and that's the first and foremost thought, and it even usurps his desire for vengeance against Kurotsuchi. So I kind of look at it that way, whereas like Kaien in that moment that's where he faltered the most, is like not acknowledging the fact that what he's doing would be devastating for the people that are literally watching this fight, Yeah. So when I think about it that way, I'm glad you mentioned Kaien, because now, it's getting me thinking about this. It's so cool.
Yeah, thinking so cool. It must be a first for you. No, I'm kidding. Sorry, I just saw an opportunity for a dumb joke and I had to say it.
Let's go. Keep them coming, bro. Keep them coming. I love it.
So this isn't a point I wanted to make, but more. It was so someone else gave me this observation. And I think there was a following point, but the problem is I remember the connections they were making, but I don't remember the ultimate takeaway from the point. So, but I'm gonna say it since we've seen enough moments of that. But it just had me point out to me that so in the first chapter, Rukia gives Ichigo her powers by stabbing him in the front. In the Kaien flashback, Rukia kills Kaien by stabbing him in the front. But in the Fullbring arc, when Rukia gives Ichigo his powers from everyone, she stabs him in the back. And I don't know, I was trying to think of that compared to like what you were talking about with the what's behind you, and wondering if maybe that connects to it, because because chapter 1 and the Kaien flashback, it's more negative, right? Like, Rukia didn't want to kill Kaien, like Kaien's kind of forcing that onto Rukia. I guess in chapter 1 there's more of a mutual thing there, because Radman was pointing out how like Rukia had issues with being a Soul Reaper, so and of course I mentioned how Ichigo wants to protect everything, so he took all of her power, but ultimately like that wasn't the ideal sort of exchange between them, because there's bad mentalities on both of their sides, resulting in that exchange. What were you gonna say? I feel like you had a moment.
A little bit. No, it's still not complete. I'm thinking more and more about the symbol, because I had honestly completely forgot that she stabbed him in the back, but now I literally am now remembering the panel as you mentioned it. It's a god tier panel. It just came to my mind. You awakened a memory for me. Can't wait to get to that. But no, I don't think that's quite right. So I don't even want to start. No, I'd have to think a little bit more about that. But I think I'm getting somewhere in my mind. And
if someone in the comments who like, I know the one in white just mentioned that they were going to watch this discussion, and I've talked with them about about Bleach years ago. So maybe she'll remember. But yeah,
hopefully, I would love to see her interpretation of that, because that is a really, especially how it connects with literally what I was saying. Like you said. So that's, I'm really sorry. I'm like racking my brain right now, trying to think, because I think I'm getting somewhere, but I haven't reached the conclusion yet. So I don't want to start just to leave us again with another open-ended
I think
interpretation.
That's another thing I was going to say about like this discussion is I think I think it's not even just fine, but it's good to ask questions, right? Because like actually I had someone DM me they caught up with One Piece and they DM me a couple questions about the Kuma flashback, and it just got me thinking about things that I hadn't really thought about before, right? Because there's also a level, I think, because I feel like when we talk about things and be big brained, like there's a part of me that like I want to impress people by having a really good point and make them go, oh, I didn't think about that, right? But I feel like that there's a risk there of just like feeling stupid in a sense of like making a point that's too obvious or not knowing things, and I kind of don't want to feel that that's a negative thing. I think it's good to have questions and want to a desire to an intellectual curiosity, if that makes sense, right? So that's why I put that out there as like I don't know the answer, like, and I'm fine with not knowing the answer because I hope that not knowing the answer, and because if I just stayed silent because I didn't want to look like a fool, right? Like now that's a lot of people are maybe not going to hear about this thing, and when it could be really interesting, and maybe there's something going on there, and I think there was, because I think I heard something going on there. I just don't remember what it was. I
really like that, and I could learn to be more open to just trying to spit and see if it leads somewhere.
Hey, I mean, my last One Piece videos could be really fucking wrong in the future, but I'm okay with that because that's a learning opportunity in itself. I think it can be a good mentality. So,
but anything else on Uryu specifically?
No, I think I think I'm done with Uryu for now.
Okay. So moving on to another fight.
Okay.
Actually, no. Before that, we should talk about, because you mentioned before we hit record that you had an appreciation.
Yes.
Because this is a fight that I garnered way more appreciation for, but you had another fight that was like that for you as well.
Yeah, well, so I was going to ask you, so what were your thoughts on Ganju versus Yumichika? Because I've read the fight twice now, once for the Nensho and once when I reread Bleach, and both times there was a level of like, I guess I wasn't really getting what the fight was going for explicitly, in a sense, and then it finally clicked for me. So I was kind of curious as to what have your takeaways been from Ganju versus Yumichika? And,
oh my god, you might have just exposed me as a fraud. I'm trying as we speak to remember dialogue from that fight, and for the life of me, I cannot.
Yeah,
I remember there's the scene where he's like about to fall, and he mentions that where he's about to fall used to be it was a tradition that's long since been erased.
Oh,
and he even mentions it as an ugly tradition.
Yes,
where they would watch convicts, fight to the death against hollows, right?
Right, which he was like, this is brutal and gross, and we're better than that now. We've gotten rid of that tradition.
Yeah,
yes.
But
okay.
Interesting. Does he mention? No, continue with what you were going to say.
So what? Well, I mean, one part I want to mention that's just more funny is I like the way he ends off in a firework, because fireworks are beautiful. They're pretty. True. He ends the fight in a beautiful way, and because Yumichika was like, I think even later there's another joke where Yumichika's like, oh, is that you, Ganju, the ugly one? And he's like, hey, people say I look better in bandages, and it's like, but you're just affirming that he's saying but you're ugly. He has
a potential for beauty, even more beautiful than. You literally were just saying his name earlier, and I'm already forgetting it.
Ganju?
Not Ganju, but the pretty
Yumichika?
guy. Yumichika, yeah. He has a display that could even surpass Yumichika's beauty. That is a cool. That's I had never.
Well, but anyway, what I really got out of the fight is because Yumichika's talking about beauty during the fight, and obviously dismissing Ganju as ugly. And another thing he says is that at least hope to die beautifully. Right? And that's where the point of contrast comes in, because Ganji says that he's more interested in living, whether it's I forget his exact line, whether it's beautiful or ugly or that, but so the difference between that I think is because obviously Ganju hates Soul Reapers. He just he lives in Soul Society, but he really has an issue with them. And I think you can especially the way Yumichika he talks about oh, look at this thing, this old brutal thing, good thing we're better than that, but he's still sort of speaking highly of death in a sense, right? The fact that this whole arc is centered around an execution, right? As a whole, the Soul Reapers kind of look positively on death, right? Like they are these managers of death. They guide people to the next world, but that's been taken to a point where they have a kind of positive outlook on death in a way that maybe isn't good, right? Because Ganju's take is like, no, surviving is what's important. Living is beautiful.
Oh
in a
yeah,
sense.
and that's also really cool. Like the most supreme weapon they have in all of the Seirei is this. It's this executioner's tool,
yes.
right? It's this beautiful weapon that's sole purpose is to cut
and we
off
see
heads.
and like when we see it later, it's this fucking majestic ass phoenix. Like this is a beautiful way to kill people, right? But
ultimately, what you're doing, it's
yes.
leading to the same conclusion, which is like ugly death. That is so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so what I realized though, because I was thinking, because basically what got me thinking is I was just asking the question of like, what would to Yumichika, what would be a beautiful death? And I didn't think about Bleach. What I actually thought of was One Piece, right? Because like imagine Whitebeard at the war, right? Like the fucking account of like how many bullets and cannonballs he took, right? As this proud parent figure gives his life for his children, right? To protect his, like that's a beautiful death, right? Like One Piece has a lot of deaths like that, like these noble sacrifices. And then but the reason that stuck with me is because and look, don't get me wrong, I love those moments, I love One Piece so much, but I just realized that I don't think Bleach really has anything like that. I don't think Bleach ever portrays death as beautiful, right? Like when I think of Misaki dying for Ichigo, right? It's not like this. It's still a parent dying for a child, but she's not standing proudly with Arlong's gun to her head like Belmare. She's just like crumpled on the ground covering her son, right? Like death is this very sad thing that happens that those who live have to bear and deal with, and that's kind of what So Bleach gets across, it adds to its theme of grief by making sure that death is never portrayed as beautiful. And I sort of realized that through Yumichika, who is kind of antithetical to the only possible. See, I'm open to being wrong on this because it's kind of a burgeoning thought. The only slight exception I might think of is Ulquiorra, but even then I feel like not Ichigo and Orihime don't want him to die. Like Orihime is crying, Ichigo's like, I don't want to win this way. And I guess if anything's beautiful about that scene, it's less about his death and more about what his understanding in that death, right? In his moment of death, right? So, what were you gonna say? I feel.
No, honestly, I probably shouldn't, just because it's not that it's irrelevant. It's just because you mentioned One Piece, and this reminds me of literally. I guess I'll go ahead and say, because I don't want to talk a lot about different series, especially because spoilers. I'm a little bit worried about spoilers because this is like a big spoiler for Naruto.
I mean, I feel like it's my okay. Well, part of me is just like this audience is like they're. Our audience is, and if our audience isn't familiar with Naruto and One Piece, then like how the fuck did they find our channels?
Yeah, okay, true.
And
true. Yeah. Well,
so I'll market. I did kind of spoil One Piece a bit. Like it's also, I'll leave a time code just in case of like you can skip to this point if you want to avoid spoilers for One Piece and Naruto. But
I'm gonna blitz through this because this is not Bleach. I'm about to start, so I'm blitz through this. So in Naruto, this literally reminds me. I don't know where I saw it. But it's this filler scene, when they're doing the filler arcs in the Fourth Great Ninja War, where they show Kushina and Minato laid out after they die, because you never get to see that in canon, and it's so it puts into perspective like, oh, this is like death. They look so they look like any other shinobis, just like laid out, just bloodied and dead and deceased, backs on the ground, nothing special. Bloodied, beaten, still lifeless. Like it's just this really quiet. It's probably like only 5 seconds where you get to see them lay down. It's like, oh wow, we've never seen this perspective, and it's so like it's just death. Like there's nothing beautiful. There's no whiting out of like Minato and Kushina going like we love you, Naruto, and it's like this white effect. It's just like, no, these two bodies are just dead, and that is very much what you were saying Bleach is and how it depicts death a lot. Which is, I never thought about that specifically, but you're so right. Because before you even mentioned Ichigo's mother, that's actually the first panel I thought of, is because it's his mother kind of laid out on top of him, and it's just her back is all bloodied, and she's just right, dead.
Like, death isn't a dignified thing, right? Yeah. It's this very sad and tragic thing, and like Umichika is kind of, not seeing it that way because he's a soul reaper. It's his job. Death is his job. He's gonna take, and he takes pride in his job and his beauty. So of course, he's gonna see things this way. But yeah, so that's what I meant when I like talking to you before, where it's like, here's this fight that I literally just kind of straight up didn't understand when I last time through the manga, and then I read it and I was like, oh my god, I could see my third eye is fucking opened. I understand Bleach as a whole a little more now.
That is a really cool takeaway from that fight. Holy shit!
Thank you. I wasn't expecting it.
I immediately I'll say that I'm pretty sure I read through that fight very quickly. I would say dismissively, honestly, and you just showed me the way. I think I need to pay way more attention to these fights and give them their dues. Like I need to be more attentive.
Well, because like, pretty sure... so that was a thought I had. Like, because when we get the cool spread with all the captains, right? I literally stopped there and I looked at them and I was like, every single one of these motherfuckers is important at some fucking point in the future. Many of these guys gets multiple fights. Like, he's just doubling. He's basically doubling or tripling our main cast in a sense. Like, obviously, the crew that we know up to this point is still like the most important characters, but the captains and a lot of these assistant captains too are also very fucking important, right? And so the fact that Kubo got this idea across through Umichika, who's like the fourth most important character from Squad 11, right? Like, and Ganju, a character who kind of doesn't this is his arc, right? This is the arc that we see him doing. I feel like he does some stuff later, but it's relatively minor, right? But even in the small fight,
the Fullbrings, right? The Fullbringers, the Fullbring
if not,
guys. Something like that, right?
Okay, it definitely.
I was thinking the Shiba family has something to do with them. In the 1,000-Year Blood War, like they.
Because right, because the Fullbringers who die end up in Soul Society, and Ganju and Kukak, the Shiba family gathers them up so that they can help. That might be it. It's been a while, so and that's the thing. Yeah, there's so many details in Bleach. That's why reading that Radman comment was like, oh my god, because he's just tying together all these. He had the follow-up comment talking about they weren't actually reacting to the whole Gyoku. They're reacting to just Rukia's Gagai in general, and something about the Gagai being forbidden or this type of Gagai. And I was like, I didn't know that was a thing. I just fucking forgot or didn't that detail didn't stick with me right there because it's a fucking 74 volume manga. Excuse me for not remembering every tiny little thing.
It's very dude, Kubo, man, Godbo for a reason.
See, look, I'm glad I'm a One Piece fan, but there's also part of me that just wishes I had the level of understanding I have with One Piece for all those small details and characters, right? But for Bleach instead, or not instead, but both. I can do both. I want both. That's what, because Bleach is it's so fucking good.
It is, yeah.
Oh boy.
And so I am curious, since you had that amazing observation from that fight, that I guess the only word that comes to mind is I was probably a little bit too dismissive of it, because I did, admittedly, and this is a fault I've had, and I'm glad we're now going to start doing these in instead 2-week segments, every 2 weeks, because it gives me a lot more time, because there are every day I'm reading at a pretty quick pace, because I'm reading multiple volumes in one day, generally 4 or 5. I've been kind of I will slack off for a while, then I'll read it all in one, and that's definitely not helpful in these discussions. I need to which is good. Now I can get a good schedule. And
I lit the fire under HotBoySpicy. Yeah, or cool lad Minty.
That is I shouldn't be speed reading these fights that I can garner something out of, because all of them will eventually stack up and help me appreciate holistically Bleach as a series a lot more. But on that note, I want to know if there's any new significant stuff you got out of the big boy fight, Ichigo versus Kenpachi.
New stuff? That's a good question because
Because honestly, I didn't. It's the stuff
yeah,
that
I
I
mean
had.
it's still a good fight. I like the art is crazy. Like Kenpachi's presence is really cool, but that's also how I felt the first time through.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like yeah, I feel yeah. Let me look through my notes and see if I can find it because it's still a good fight. But as far as like you said, new observations specifically, not a lot of those. Because it's just like oh, there was a line I guess about like when those who don't trust each other fight together, their strength is diminished, and trust is huge in the Fullbring arc, right? Because Ichigo ultimately can't trust his friends to protect themselves. Like that, like you actually see
Mm.
that in this arc with Chad, because like the flashback kind of puts them on even like, and there's also Ichigo being back to back with Uryu in the last arc, as where Ichigo at that point was able to see Uryu as an equal, and in the flashback we him and Chad are really similar. They're both discriminated against for their appearance. They're both really strong, and they put and Ichigo's able to put themselves on equal terms with them. But as the series goes on and we see that Ichigo is just stronger than everybody. Like that's what happened. Like Chad loses to Kyoraku. We don't even fucking see it. He just gets fucking like wrecked off panel basically, right? And then Ichigo finds out. He's like, "What? Chad got defeated?" Like he can't believe it, right? Even though they're in this giant basically city with all these incredibly powerful guys. Like the idea that Chad lost is impossible to him, right? And so like
Yeah,
there's a
and that
level of
kind of
like
goes in. Yeah,
faith and
keep going. Sorry.
disillusionment and lack of trust he would have in Chad. So what were you gonna say?
Yeah, because I was going to say that kind of goes into what you were saying about Aizen, about how Ichigo had this built-up perception of Chad that accumulated into this like insane faith in his strength. Like he literally says, like, I can't even imagine Chad losing. But what happens? And okay, I might be capping right now. All right, correct me if I'm wrong. But doesn't after this like Ichigo kind of lose faith even in like Chad's ability, and where he's like always trying to like, isn't that like a thing in Hueco Mundo, like pre Hueco Mundo, where Ichigo's trying to do everything himself and like he kind of loses faith in
Yeah,
the
well,
ability of his
I mean, especially
friends?
because like one of the first things that happens in Huecamundo is Ulquiorra and Yami come in, and they just fucking like Chad just gets fucking one shot basically, right?
Okay,
Like,
yeah, because like yeah, it's this perception that like nothing can come in his way, and well, actually backing up a little bit with Ichigo, right? Like Ichigo has faith that he can that he can win, especially given his training with Urahara. That's like the focal point of Urahara is Urahara is
mhm.
basically telling him like you're never going to be able to win a fight against the greats unless you have the mentality, which is like a huge theme in Bleach, is like you fight not only with your might but with your mind, right? Where it's like your
Mhm.
mentality in a battle is at least half of it, if not more. With Ichigo, he is defeated a lot before he gets to come back and finally get his victory. But he's dismantled quite often in the series throughout the series. Yet when Chad loses, here and there to enemies that some of which in instances Ichigo didn't have a chance against, like, well, yeah, of course Chad with a lot of adversity is going to stumble sometimes, but he's ultimately like you, Ichigo. He's going to get back up. But since Ichigo had this sort of like this very narrow perception of Chad, where it's like, oh, he's always going to win. He's I trust in his strength. It's almost like this like unrealistic faith, and is immediately when it gets shattered, it's like he can't rebuild it into something more realistic. It's either,
Mhm.
oh, Chad is like impervious, or now like, oh, he's lost his luster and now I got to be the one to defend them. It goes into what you were saying about Aizen, about how like faith is a very it's a very
It's a
fragile thing.
risky, yes,
Yeah,
yes, for
uh,
sure.
and I think that goes into Ichigo's perception of Chad, because I'm glad
Because yeah,
you
he
you
does. You're right. He does swing into the opposite direction, where too far, right? Where it's like,
yeah.
because Chad is like, he's still capable. He's just not like Ichigo wouldn't have been able to beat Kyoraku either. Like let's be fucking real. He's a captain who like he only beat Kenpachi because Kenpachi wasn't trying, right? Like because
Yeah.
that's Kenpachi's whole thing is he wants a good fight, and he's literally like because they have the
Well,
pride is like a blade poem, right? And if and he's just like he's let his pride rest, like he's just giving up all of his pride to have a good fight instead of like fighting as his full potential, right? But anyway, sorry
yeah,
for
not
cutting
only
off there.
that, wait, that is actually so funny, because I think doesn't even doesn't even what is starts with an S. The captain, the flower captain.
You mean? Well, I call him Kyoraku, he's the one with all the facial hair who succeeds Yamato in the Thousand Year War.
Kyoraku. I always called him by his other name, but I'm forgetting his other name now.
No, I noticed that too because like sometimes like I don't know. I don't even think I'm consistent with it. I just like pick one name that's easier for me to say as a fucking English speaking asshole, and I stick to that one. So
gotcha.
or sometimes like with characters like Kenpachi, it's like you just call him he's Kenpachi, right? Like that's just nobody calls him. I've never heard anyone call him Zaraki. No one's ever said that in their entire lives.
No one
except Orihime. Actually, I take that back because someone commented on the fact that she said called him Zaraki. But anyway, I
didn't even notice that. That's cute. Okay, that's cute. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, I hope I get better at names the further, because I can't keep getting stun locked when I'm trying to like say something. is hopefully not going to be a trend that lasts.
I mean, you can at least be like, hey, describe them, and hopefully and I can at least
flower guy, flower captain, pretty easy to understand who it is at least. Yeah. And
yes.
Then, I'm talking about Ukitake. I can remember though, even though like I feel like. I don't know. Like
he's probably like he's one of the more minor captains. Like I even mentioned, like seeing that spread, he wasn't there. He's like he does some really important things sometimes, but he's definitely like due to his health issues, he kind of takes a back seat generally. Like he's not there fighting in fake car. Was he there? Maybe he was. I don't know. I don't remember. He doesn't have as strong of a presence in my mind, I guess. So
but is it Shusui? Is that like his? No, that's not. I think that's a Naruto character, right?
I mean, it might be. They're Japanese names. They can be both.
Yeah, it could be. But God, what is this? It starts with an S. I know. You mentioned Kyoraku as his other name, but whatever. Anyway, regardless, I think doesn't even in the Chad fight, doesn't he mention when he defeats Chad? Like
Shunsui.
Shunsui. Jesus. Okay, it's very, very similar at least. Okay, so I've saved them that
close.
Yeah. So Shunsui, he even mentions like. I might be making. I hope I'm not making this up. He says something about like Chad being unlucky, right? Like you're unlucky to have like to have like come across me, and I might be making that up. I feel like he said something like that. If I'm making it up, I'm sorry, guys, because I'm about to say something cool here. But Ichigo, it's the opposite with Ichigo, where he got lucky not once but twice because of his fucking mask. They're like.
Oh
wait,
yeah,
Ichigo. Wait, it stopped this. It stopped the blade from going through.
Well, I wouldn't say that's lucky necessarily because like he literally was like fucking. He spooked Yoriichi because he's like, oh yeah, that mask. That's weird. I threw that away. Like his fucking like Shiro's protecting him by growing these masks where he's being attacked from, basically. And
that's also that's also part of the whole theme around Ichigo, which is that like the more he understands about himself, which is actually the case for all the characters, and it's not just Ichigo, but it's the most poignant with Ichigo's characters, especially given he's the main character, is like the more that he understands about himself, the more power he gets, and that's one part of himself, one part of his past he doesn't know yet. That's constantly there, hinting and reminding him, almost in the same vein that Aizen does with his plan, but. It's cool that we're seeing that manifest, and also, with that in mind, this is also the first arc. I guess I'd forgotten for some reason. I was thinking the first time we see Hollow Ichigo, White Ichigo was in pre-Hueco, like right after Soul Society. I had completely forgotten we see him actually in the training.
Yeah,
I don't know why I was thinking he comes in later, but he comes in this arc. So that was cool. I completely forgot about this. But is there any cool observations from that introduction?
Well, real quick, I just scrolled through the Kyoraku Chad stuff. I might have missed it, but he doesn't seem to mention luck specifically.
All right, well,
before or after.
Yeah.
I was wrong because I just forgot the panel that he clearly cuts down Chad. I said, oh, he beats Chad off screen. It's like, no, I just the image of him like lying in his own blood was more memorable to me than the panel of him getting cut. So,
at least we can
both
be frauds.
wrong.
At least we can be frauds together. Together. That hurts a little bit less.
But yeah, I feel like I didn't really get any new fresh observations out of Ichigo versus Kenpachi. Just the way way, because it's even kind of directly states the way that they're similar, and like how I wasn't really listening to my sword either, and just like, and Kenpachi even says like, what's the point, it's just strength, just and he loses because he wasn't listening to his sword, and Kenpachi gets that drive to be stronger. What were you gonna say? Sorry.
Yeah, I guess my first one was early on in the battle. I love the transition. I don't know how, it doesn't matter if it's intentional, it's still really cool. So in his introduction, Tosin ends his introduction by saying, "I hate battles." And that immediately transitions back to Kenpachi and Ichigo. And one might just look at Kenpachi in this moment and go, oh, okay, this is like a clear dichotomy. It's like, Kenpachi loves battles and Tosin hates battles. But in actuality, I was thinking a little bit about the later stuff that I recognize in Ichigo in my previous read-through of Bleach, where Kenpachi, even in his reminiscence of battle of this fight, Ichigo is thinking of that idea of battle and that love for battle Kenpachi has that he can't relate to, but he actually does, because in actuality, Ichigo is at his most fulfilled when he's in a battle to protect his friends. That's when he feels like his life has the most meaning and the most value.
Yes.
In actuality, he loves battle just as much as Kenpachi. It's just for a different reason. That's the only distinction. So I was thinking, oh, that's such a cool transition, because it's not just about Kenpachi. It's about both of these characters we're seeing on panel right now. They actually both love battle. And it's so cool. And then I had some observations, let's see here, about also more paneling Kubo does with... See, again, I'm going to get stun locked on the names, guys. It's going to happen until I finally fucking remember. We're going to just have to get used to it. I'm so sorry. Pink-haired little girl.
Yachiru.
Yachiru. The panel
it'll be funny with one day you say, oh, what was that character? And I literally just say the character before you even describe it. That'll be funny.
That's going to be the day. There's going to be that one character I never remember their names. But I think the paneling and some of the... There's one scene where Kenpachi says something along the lines. You get a little bitty flashback sequence of him and Yachiru, and he goes, "Do you have a name, kid?" And he's like, "I don't have one either." And it's like black screen. There's just a panel of black screen, and it's like he opens his eyes on her, right? And where he's asking her, "Do you have a name?" But she's always had a name. And it's always been right in front of him, because she is him. She is a part of his power, but he never acknowledged it. And he never inquired about his power. And it's just cool how Kubo does that subtle paneling as like this really clear, like in retrospect, it's clear foreshadowing, because it's like,
the fact that he literally, hey, where did you come from, kid? Next panel, Yachiru literally touching his sword. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. But also, when Kenpachi is like talking to his sword, right? There's a panel, and it's like, it's not. Because generally, these panels, it would be like a smallish panel. It'd be kind of minor. But the panel takes up a lot of the page of Yachiru whenever he's talking to his sword. When he's like, hey, talk to me. I want to know more about you. And it's like her witnessing this moment with Kenpachi and the sword. But she's taking up a lot of the page. So it's almost like, hey, it's me, right? I don't know. It's just cool it's cool, like, reading this again and looking at that and going, oh, wow. Like, Kubo, it's pretty obvious Kubo had this in mind all the way back here. And we don't see the fruits of this all the way until the final arc. That's crazy to think about.
Yeah, it wasn't an uncommon theory at the time.
Really? I didn't even know.
I won't say at the time, because I just remember that I was aware of the theory literally before I started reading Bleach, basically. But it's also, hey, cool, people called it. That's good. That means the authors, especially like looking back. The way you talk about like the way the panels work, and just especially like looking at that page, and just the way you have the three smaller panels going through Kenpachi's like small changes of expression. I also really like the way he draws blood sometimes, because it's like you see the individual like fucking streaks of the blood where they dripped, and it's just like Kubo's art is so good. I hadn't even focused on, because that big panel with him holding the sword up, like there's no sound effect in it. Like the silence is deafening. It's just really effective stuff.
Oh my god, man. Yeah. Jesus, I'm trying to, because there's there's a really cool moment after this where Yoruichi is kind of explaining how Shikais and Bankais mechanically work.
Yes.
And she even mentions that, like, oh, Ichigo, you've experienced this just in your last battle, pointing to when Zangetsu comes out and is talking to Ichigo externally, and how Bankai is not only the externalization, but the submission of the Zanpakuto. I thought that was really cool because I immediately associated that with Yashiru and her relationship with Kenpachi, and how somehow Kenpachi bypassed the synchronization part that is necessary with Shikai in order and somehow manifested Yachiru, kind of in a similar way of Bankai, but there's no submission to where he can actually. Well, no, it's because the reason why he's not able to unleash his Bankai is because he bypassed the synchronization part by acknowledging his Zanpakuto, by acknowledging Yachiru. And I think that there's something more there probably that you can pick up on.
What I was gonna say is because for one, Yoruichi turns out to be wrong about the idea of a permanent release Shikai, right? Because it's like that's not a thing. Byakuya mentions it later. It's really just like Ichigo and Kenpachi have unusual circumstances regarding their swords that Radman explained with Ichigo. Like his original sword was literally just his spirit energy manifested as a sword, not an actual Zanpakuto. Yeah. And Kenpachi, he took his sword from a dead soul. I mentioned it last time. It wasn't forged for him. He literally just picked it up from a dead body and has continued to use it. So it's not his in a sense until he basically.
That is true. I completely And do we see that? Did I literally just like speed read that?
I mean, I'm pretty sure. Well, because chronologically the first time we see Kenpachi is when he's basically a street urchin with that sword, and he fights Unohana, who defeats him, and basically. Because he even mentions like Yachiru.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah, you're right.
He mentions the name of the person I most look up to, or something like that, which is Yachiru Unohana, right? Like God, I love that shit later on. The
one I respect most. Yeah, I was actually thinking about that, and I was like, because. I should have just looked it up. So her name, because I immediately thought of Unohana too. So it is her full name, Yachiru Unohana.
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
Right, because his actual sword is named I think it's Nozarashi or something to that. Like, because I feel like that it's something to that effect. Because I was actually going to say something interesting. I think I noticed this a while ago because I brought it up in my Aizen video in regards to the way that like. The people of Soul Society don't question enough of their world, basically, and as a result, they have lack of understanding for it. Because Squad 11 is pretty interesting because they all have this very feverish love of him, right? Like they don't use they only use Shikai if it's a they don't use like Yumi Chika has a whole thing later on in the Arnkar arc where he talks about how it's like, oh, I actually have like two versions of Shikai because like he uses like sword's partial name for his just regular weapon one, but he has a second the full name that he uses, but it's like it's frowned upon in Squad 11, so there's like a part of himself that he hides away because they have this value of like roster, like they don't use Bankais for cowards, right? And Kenpachi even has a line like that where it's like Kenpachi, he only cares about the raw strength in his fight with Ichigo, but ultimately it's like it's not like he just can't use his Shikai or Bankai because he doesn't have that understanding of his sword, and like once he's able to do them, he does. Like it's because he loses to Ichigo and overcomes that. But there's other things that they take away from Kenpachi that are also very clearly like not good or wrong. Like they have the way they treat Squad 4 in Yamada, right? Because they look down on healing. Kenpachi doesn't need healing. He's so insanely strong. He's practically invulnerable. And fucking, we see towards the end of the reading when Komamura and Tosen attack him, and he's just like, this shit ain't gonna wake me up. Like he just fights. He fights two captains single-handedly. Like he's just so strong. But then what do we find out? That the leader of Squad 4 is the person Kenpachi respects the most, right? Like no one knows this thing about Kenpachi, so they look down on healing and Squad 4. but that we find, but Unohana is literally, her goal is to heal Kenpachi. She wants to,
Yeah,
fix
I was
him,
literally
in a
just about to
sense.
say that. Yeah,
Yeah.
because in their fight, that becomes his ultimate boon through her, because she's constantly healing him so that he can reach his actual potential. Yeah.
Yes. So, just one of the ways that, like, yeah, just it's interesting because they have this, like, they have this faith in Kenpachi, but it's not backed by understanding of Kenpachi, because he, yeah. So yeah, just something else I noticed a while ago. But again, like, yeah, it's still a good fight. But again, like you said, not a lot of new stuff I'm getting out of it.
Yeah, and again, I think the most interesting part of it is the discussion of battle in of itself. Like, why wouldn't I love battle? Like, battle is where, you truly feel alive. That whole idea, when you place it on Ichigo, it becomes way cooler. It's like it but albeit I will say it becomes a lot more clear as to where Kubo is going with that. The more you go on, because from my recollection, Ichigo recalls this moment in his training segment when he's back in the world with his with Zangetsu and stuff, and white Ichigo. So it becomes pretty clear that, like, the focus is on Ichigo's perception of battle and what battle means to him, and it's cool. But yeah, not a whole lot. I just noticed some things that I might not have noticed about Yachiru beforehand. That was cool. But is there any other? Because I will say, even Ichigo versus Ikaku, I like, but that's less so thematically and more so. I really love. It's a really short fight. First of all, short and sweet.
Mm-hmm.
I love the choreography in it. As a matter of fact, I think I've even like live on one of my live streams talked about, like, the choreography in Bleach and how I think, like, the choreography isn't as good as, like, some of my other action mangas I like. But then, like, I'm reading this arc and I'm like, what the fuck am I talking? The choreography in a lot of these fights is insane. There's a whole, like, I don't remember. It's like Ichigo is, like, spinning with his Zanpakuto toe, because I think Kenpachi, like, catches his blade, and then, like, Ichigo starts spinning around with it, and it's like, it looks so fucking cool. And it's like, oh wait, this choreography is actually sick as shit. I don't know.
No, that's one of the things, with Bleach, that I think is interesting about Bleach, is because I think, like, yeah, it does have so many, like, interesting, like, layers and subtext and thematic ideas and ways of getting across. But also, you can literally just enjoy it as, like, and I mean this, I don't mean this as an insult, like, as a meathead, and just, like, because it is just raw and sick and cool, right?
Yeah,
like that's one of the things, like, because I mentioned, like, oh, death isn't framed as beautiful, or it's, but battle is fucking cool, because Ichigo loves fighting is cool, right? Like,
yeah,
like, that in itself, and I think that's really nice.
Yeah, and on those raw moments, I mean, there's even the small stuff I'm just appreciating so much more. Whereas that little scene where Ichigo's fighting the guard, the big giant guard guy, who cries when his axes get crushed.
Oh yeah. Oh wow, I forgot that that was this reading.
Yeah, Ichigo. Ichigo says something so cool when like Uryu's like, oh my god, he must have done some special training with Urahara. He's like, no, he didn't really teach me how to do anything. But I did learn. What does he say? He essentially just says, like, I essentially just learned how to fight. And it's just this cool. It just puts into perspective that, like, oh yeah, what Ichigo was lacking was just, like, real battle experience, and Urahara, like, pushed him to the edge by just fighting him like he was trying to kill him. And then that's extended even more so with the Ikaku fight. And again, this is not some, like, deep observation. More so, this is just an acknowledgement of how raw this shit is. Is like in the fight with Ikaku, like, in the middle of it, he's not thinking of his fight with Ikaku. He's immediately thinking of Urahara, and even how it's paneled is Ikaku is a certain distance away from Ichigo, but in the panel below where he's recalling Urahara is closer to him. Like, it's right on his face. Yes. Ikaku is like, you can see most of Ikaku's body, but with Urahara, you can see, like, only his face. So it's this kind of, like, visual depiction of, like, oh, in the same amount of time, Uryu was already right in front of Ichigo, and Ikaku is not. Really cool way to showcase the difference in abilities through that like visual. I thought that was so cool. I was like, it's just cool to see things like this, to see it depicted artistically like this, like the difference in ability, and the fact that even Ichigo is recalling Urahara here as like a clear indicator of like, you're not him, bro. Like, yeah, like I don't know. I like just a new
because as far as like
appreciation of that.
takeaways from the fight is like like it's pretty clear about like Ikaku has his focus on luck, and it ends off with they're both unlucky because Ikaku is Ikaku, like, he chased after one of the 4 explosions and he ran into literally the strongest guy. Ichigo's unlucky because, like, under better circumstances that we end up seeing later, they would be friends, and they do become friends. Like, at the end of the reading, Ikaku's literally fighting against Soul Society alongside Kenpachi and Ichigo, right? So, but it's still a really cool fight, for sure. And yeah, no, I noticed the speed one as well, but it's with Urahara. I think not while reading it, but like while scrolling through, like looking for something else. But I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. But cool fight.
It's
and yeah, it does set up like Ikaku, because that recurs throughout all of his fights later on. I'm pretty sure too. Well, because like that's something I had the idea of doing a video on, because like, I mean, I guess it's also true to a degree with like One Piece, but like where you have these long running stories and then you have like Bleach really does it well, I think, because you have like arc themes in a sense. Like with Soul Society, it's like challenging stagnates and the like, but then you also have like individual character themes. Like with Ikaku, it's with his luck. With Kurotsuchi, it's with like progress and science, right? Like that's another thing, because Kurotsuchi's flaw in this arc is he's believed himself, like like we kind of see it with his in the Arankar arc, because he fights against the I forget he's got a really fucking hard ass to pronounce name, but because his whole thing is like, I'm perfect. I don't need to research anymore as a scientist, because I've reached my pinnacle. Where Kurotsuchi more recognizes that progress is never ending, basically, and so so that's his recurring idea. Because literally in the last arc, I'm pretty sure he fights. Because there's the 2 hands, Migi and Hirari, I think, or no, I think Migi is the one for the right, because those are Japanese words for right and left, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't Hirari, it was something else for the left hand that he fights in Thousand Year Blood War. The left hand literally symbolizing progress, and the right hand literally symbolizing, stagnance is the negative word for it, but I'd use a more positive word for it, but basically that.
Really?
Things staying the same.
Wow, that is such a cool observation. I
well,
never noticed that.
That was because ultimately, the left hand is fighting against Soul Society because it wants things to change by Quincy supremacy, and Ukitake uses the right hand to literally like keep the Soul King in place, basically.
That's right. So, I could see the Thousand Year Blood. It's been so long.
That's fine.
Yeah.
And more than that, I guess this is I see. It's more me like trying to build connections, but it's because I remember someone said something about, because like Kubo cuts off arms a lot. Like it literally happens twice in this reading, once with the giant and once with this sort of illusory Yoriichi, when Byakuya cuts off her arm. And I just was like, but someone in a comment mentioned how like, oh, he does this a lot and it's meaningful, but they didn't explain why it's meaningful. And so I kind of had to figure it myself, and I guess like so far, because like with Yoriichi, I mean, she was illusory, and but I'm pretty sure both of them lost their left arms. And so if we symbolize the left arm as progress, then like, so the giant was literally trying to help Ichigo into Soul Society, right? And he himself was changing as a going against Soul Society. But Gin stopped his progress. He cut off his left arm, right? And Byakuya was trying to do the same with Yoriichi when he cut off her left arm, but it was, it was just there was a trick there, and she was able to escape, and so maybe.
Because the progress he sees is wait, no, I'm getting ahead of myself here, because Gin's ultimate plan was to thwart Aizen at the end of the day, so I can't really say that. Because the conclusion of that observation is actually in the opposite direction. But anyway, so gonna go ahead and put the caboose on that one before I even start.
But that's just something like that I've kind of like that. Maybe that's what that person was getting at, or maybe someone else has broken it down somewhere. That's just kind of what I've that's well, that even goes into just like because I think you were talking about it like I think last time about how if something repeats, right? Oh, that's why I was thinking about it, because someone I know was talking about how like, oh, this story seems maybe a bit cliche or something like that, and I was like just thinking about like, well, why do we as a culture repeat these stories, right? Because something about them is alluring to us, right? Like there's something interesting to like us as a people that we want to see these stories again and again, right?
Sure.
Even in my favorites, like I notice connections and like similar ideas being presented, and it's like, I really like these ideas again and again and again. Maybe that says something about me or my tastes, right? And that's, I think, applies to like why does Bleach have multiple rescue arcs? Why do all these characters lose their arms? And it's like, well, we want to investigate that, and there can be interesting things there. So yeah.
Yeah, I never thought about the arms, but maybe that's just because like so far it hasn't happened quite.
It's only happened twice, right?
Yeah, yeah. Because I'm also trying to think of Substitute Shinigami, and I don't really.
Yeah, I don't remember that happening there specifically.
So maybe that's why, but I don't think I would have noticed that anyway, no matter how many arms would have gotten cut off, honestly. So that is really cool.
I mean, I only noticed it because someone said it was meaningful, but they didn't explain it, so it's like, gotta figure it out myself, I guess.
A deep dive into it. That reminds me of, actually, no, we should talk about that when we actually get to it. I'm moving ahead too much in some of these. But yeah, I kind of want to just talk about stuff we have been reading. But yeah, it was just Radman was like messaging me. He's like, "What do you think about this and this?" And I was like, "Oh, I think maybe it's saying this." And I was like, and then we were talking about it. It was really cool. And that's hopefully what this is doing. Hopefully you guys comment and we give you guys some bright ideas. You can help us realize some new cool things.
That's because like I said something earlier and then you realized something, and I love that about discussion, and that's kind of why I hope the comments help with as well.
Yeah.
I definitely have a few more things to talk about, but is there anything in particular we're thinking of, or?
Not as of right now, not as of immediately, but I go ahead and say what the one thing you want to say.
One of the things I want to talk about was so Orihime, this arc. She doesn't admittedly like get a whole lot of big stuff, but she does so many, like a lot of the small things kind of accomplish a similar thing in that they're sort of like displaying not just Orihime's mindset about herself, but also everyone else's, because, she's kind of been reduced to being that princess again, right? Being protected, right? Like Orihime is like, even though she is still competent, right? Like, yeah, there's like the one time she tries to attack a Soul Reaper and it doesn't work very well. But like then later on, we find out that Tatsuki was like, oh yeah, you could be literally like a very fucking competent karate expert. Like you're really fucking strong, Orihime, and have all this talent. And she literally disables 2 Soul Reapers with her bare fucking hands. And Uryu's like, what the fuck? But then because when she and Uryu get separated when they first break in, Uryu's like, oh, maybe you wouldn't have gotten hurt if you were alone. But she's like, no, I'm so clumsy. I definitely would have hurt myself if I was alone, right? Like she's enforcing her own uselessness onto herself in a sense when it doesn't have to be that way. And I mean, honestly, my favorite example from this arc was later on in the next reading where I think, Ichigo and Byakuya were fighting, and Uryu's like, stay back, Orihime. Motherfucker, you don't have any powers right now. What are you talking about? She has a perfect shield, hypothetically, right? Like she's like when she gets her full power. Like what are you talking about? But he just has that mindset of like protect.
I think it's I think it's more to do, and he explicitly illustrates this in his internal monologue at one point in this reading. Is he says that like and he even acknowledges her capabilities in that moment, but he also says like, Orihime, you're like the type of person that shouldn't be fight. Like you this goes against everything you stand for, essentially, to fight and to hurt other people, which ultimately, and he acknowledges, and it's true, it will be the detriment in battle, because ultimately, if you're in a battle with someone, you're going to need to do some level of harm in order to protect yourself to the maximum. And as we see time and time again, Orihime does the exact opposite. She actively she actively puts herself in harm's way in order not to harm even the enemy, and which, you know, sometimes ultimately comes, you know, in handy for her. But, you know, in times like these, it also makes her comrades want to protect her more, even though when they might not necessarily need to worry about her as much as they think they need to. This kind of goes into what I was saying earlier too, where it's like battle in Bleach it's emphasized time and time again, is mindset takes like the forefront of strength in battles. Like, where is your mind in this battle? Depending on where your mind is. Because we see that even in the frequency of Reiatsu. It's like anytime we see someone powering up with their Reiatsu, their spiritual pressure, it's when their mind is focused and there's no doubt. And for Orihime, she is constantly doubting her intent to harm because she doesn't want to harm anything. And I think that's more where Uryu is going. And, you know, fair enough, because that is very much Orihime. But ultimately, again, and I think it's similar with the Ichigo and Chad situation, he takes it to a level of extremity that's not necessarily a great depiction of reality, right?
Right. Well, because as we see how her arc resolves, is like she literally fights alongside Ichigo against fucking Yobak, the strongest character in the entire manga, right?
Indeed.
But she's not doing it offensively. She's not attacking Yobak, I don't remember, because ultimately, but she's protecting Ichigo, right? And that's
her strongest form in battle is when she's standing side by side with someone else as a support, which is exactly what Uryu disallows her to do in this fight. Even with Kurotsuchi, I say this fight as if we're looking at it, but Kurotsuchi, you know, the fight he has with him, you know, what does he say? Hey, get her out of here, random Soul Reaper guy, right?
Yeah,
but she's at her strongest in these moments, you know.
Yeah, because that's one thing I think is interesting about Bleach. So this was actually, I think spawns from the Nen show. Actually, I forget if we talked about it a lot there or if it came from after the fact. But Mathwiz had the idea of doing a video about sort of how like toxic masculinity in Bleach. And because I just noticed there's a lot of instances where like there's sort of like, you know, that's like negative elements of masculinity are criticized, like I think, like, you know, mentioned with Squad 11, where it's like they look down on healing because it's not manly, basically, right? It's not evocative of like their idea of Kenpachi, but in reality Kenpachi respects Unohana the most. So with Orihime, and it's a battle manga, right? Like it's a manga aimed like primarily at boys, even though this specific one has a lot of female fan base as well. So like there's a level at which like the characters are putting such a value on fighting capability that even Orihime is looking down on herself, right? And like we can point at Tatsuki. It's like, well, you know, she can be a strong female fighter like her, but it's not fit to her personality. That's not her individual personal strength, right? And that's sort of what she realizes through the series, that this idea is incorrect, basically, of like valuing fighting so much, because there's so much more than that. You know, so I might end up making that video, but I was just gonna I just wanted to bring that up as far as like, oh yeah, that's relevant here too.
Interesting. I had honestly never, I hadn't thought about like the idea of toxic masculinity in Bleach.
Well, I mean, because another point I was thinking about is just like Uryu and Chad. Uryu likes crafts, sewing. You know, that's not a masculine hobby, right? And Chad loves cute shit, right? He's the biggest, manliest looking guy in the fucking manga, one of them, and okay, at least in the main cast. And he fucking thinks Kon is the most adorable thing ever, right? Like he loves that little stuffed animal. And just, you know, and so they have these like less than masculine traits, but they're not. I don't know. They're never really made fun of that for that. I think it's just a part of their characters, and it's cool.
Yeah, interesting. That is interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, that'd be I would like to see you expand on that more.
Yeah, no, I definitely.
I don't know. I honestly, I'm wondering how far you. I wonder if you could even get a whole video out of that. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like because I don't know how I'd structured it, because it's definitely like a bunch of smaller points that and maybe there's more from the rest of the reading that I would come to, because like you know, some other smaller points are like, you know, how like even like the way like it treats death, right? Like I think, you know, like there's like I mean maybe the way that like the idea of like self-sacrifice is maybe that's can be tied to masculinity, or even just like I feel like when we see it in fiction it's just much more often like the sacrifice of redemption. Like it would be the channel Pop Culture Detective. I think said they were going to make a video on it years ago and I never watched it, but just like or even just like a general cultural thing of how you notice how any female character can be redeemed, but if a male character who's done a lot of horrible things has to be redeemed, they usually have to die, right? Like that's toxic masculinity, right? Like there's like you know, and that you know, so that's you know, maybe something that like ties. I don't know. There's just a whole lot of like again drifting thoughts that I would need to pull together from reading. Yumi Chiko would be another example because he's very effeminate, right? And his true self, like his true Shikai, is something he has to hide away from his Squad 11. All these masculine guys, right? So just again all these loose thoughts. So yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Again, I would like to.
I'll keep an eye out going forward because if I notice any more relevant things, because it's
that's
an
what I was going to
topic.
say. Yeah, because I'm interested to see how far you can get into that and how many scenes that you can correlate with that theme of toxic masculinity. But moving on to more toxicity. Speaking of, I am because this is something I've tried to do a little bit more. Given that I do get comments on a lot of my videos that say like, hey, Hot Boy, you're way too positive, brother. Like, do you even have any criticism of these stories you talk about? And the reality is, yes, I do. It's just that generally when I have these, especially more dramatized style analysis videos, one of the things I don't do, and every time I do it, even with the Sakura video that I recently uploaded, I tend to just delete them anyway. I generally don't like to have my personal, like my persona, my personal thoughts and experiences in these videos because this doesn't fit what I tend to want to do with my videos. It doesn't flow with my content right. And always with criticism, it's going to be always very personal. They go hand in hand.
Well, because I think we're both very aware of like just and pro like artistic expression and like because I think a lot of issue I've seen people fall into is like they have this idea of like stories need to be this way and then they get mad at story not being that way, right? And like that's something I don't think we agree with. So when we do recognize an issue with the story, it's mostly like it's like it could be better or like I prefer, or just like I don't like it when stories do this, you know. Right. Yeah. So and also generally I tend to not think that's very interesting because I've also moved away from that in my content. Like I do have some videos that are negative. Very few of them I still agree with, but like it's generally just not what I'm interested in discussing. Right.
Okay. Well, because unfortunate choice of words because I was about to ask you if you have any critiques so far. Because for
Bleach?
Me, they're like very minor. Like just from what we've read thus far.
My mind just emptied. I can't think of anything.
No,
right
you're
now.
good. I mean, I can start minor, like super minor. But I thought I would just recognize. I would just because there's something when I'm reading or watching a story. What I hate a lot is when something reminds me that it is a story. Not to like the degree that it's like obviously I actively know this is like an experience being created for my enjoyment. That's always in my mind and in my subconscious. But when you get immersed, right, that is the highest form of entertainment is when you're deeply immersed in the world and the characters. There are some moments in movies and television and manga where there's a scene where it kind of takes you out of that immersion. And I may be hoping you have some observation here that can kind of dissuade me from this. But it's because it's so funny because I was praising the Uryu versus Mayuri fight so much. But it's when specifically Mayuri takes out the picture of Uryu's grandfather, and it's like I'm just sitting there like, wait, you just carry around a picture, like not even like this is like the one Quincy you got your fingers on, but it's like Quincy number 1,300, and you haven't even met.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Trust me, I would recognize, like, I would acknowledge if Mayuri was like, oh, but he was special. But there's like no indication that like his
fair.
grandfather was like, and I was just, it took me out. It took me out of the moment. I was like, okay, well, this is obviously Kubo conveniently like throwing this in there so he has an ignition for Uryu's rage, right? And I was reading this, I was like, wait, this is taking me out. I'm like, why the fuck does he have a picture?
Like, the best observation I have, it's just my personal thing. It's just so comically like evil that I find it funny. Like that's the best I could offer. Like it is very especially when he's like experimenting on a bunch of Quincy's, and this specific it was the last one. That would that's the most recent one.
Yeah, I guess it's like. But knowing Mayuri, see, because even that observation, knowing Mayuri's the kind of character where it's like, okay, I've done my experiments. That was the last one. Moving on. He would never be the reminiscent type to take a picture. It doesn't even flow with his character for me. So it just kind of just takes me out of the series because I don't ever see Mayuri with his characterization. Knowing everything about him.
He did already kind of think that he was done with the Quincy's until like he was literally like he was interested in Orihime at the start of the fight, right? Like he didn't care about Uryu at all until partway through the fight when he was like, oh, you're interesting after all. You have this ability that like none of the Quincy's I experimented on had the capability of. I'm interested in dissecting you after all. So there was a level at which he was, like because again I've sort of pointed out how in his fight with an Arrancar he was on the side of progress, but I think in this arc, because again Soul Society's whole thing is about stagnance. So Kurotsuchi's sort of he has the belief himself that he's sort of like not that he's done with science in particular, but in some ways he's like, I'm done. I've learned all there is to learn about the Quincy's, right? Like that's his flaw. He underestimates Uryu for it and gets bit in the ass, right? So, but anyway, that's not really related to your specific point because it's just so over the top, right? Like and
I understand that too, and there's like some comedic effect there. But ultimately, like,
and it's not necessarily supposed to be funny. Like, if it's funny, it's in a serious humor kind of way. Like, because in the moment, it's supposed to be driving home Uryu's like personal connection to the fight and his
I meant for
right?
you, in your.
But as a reader, I feel like the reader should be in Uryu's camp there. But I personally just again, it's kind of silly to me, right? Like it hits the point like the line between tragedy and comedy is thin, right? Like at a certain like how far do you have to go with the tragedy before it becomes funny? That's going to vary with people, right? So
sure.
Yeah.
And then for me it just kind of took me out of the moment. So L plus.
So yeah,
L
no,
plus
that's
ratio.
fair. I like I don't think you're incorrect there, personally, but like yeah.
But I mean that's one minor hiccup from. Oh, and that actually reminds me of going back to this fight. Mayuri's quote about like, "Are you what they call a genius?" in reference to Uryu. I wonder if there's a little bit of there's a little tinge of resentment there because given his real dynamic with Uryu, because what we know about Uryu is Uryu seems to always be a step ahead of Mayuri in his scientific progression. And I have to wonder if Mayuri looks at Urahara as like a natural born genius, whereas he's had to struggle a lot more than Uryu to get these scientific breakthroughs. I don't know, I was thinking that, and that's just not. I don't know. I have to read more because again, there's a lot I don't remember about, especially Mayuri. I'm going to be looking more, especially with stuff that you said earlier about Mayuri. I'm going to be looking more at Mayuri for the rest of this reread because I did notice that line because just from my hazy memory. I'm remembering the stuff that Uryu does, albeit Mayuri comes up with experiments that are really crazy and they help the Soul Society. Like Uryu seems to like so nonchalantly come out with this insane shit. And I'm wondering, because I know, I remember there was always that, that whole rivalry they have. But I always saw it, or at least my remembrance is that it always felt more like it's more of like a Goku and Vegeta situation where like Mayuri's always trying to get ahead of Uryu and always trying to match and exceed him, whereas Uryu doesn't really care because he's kind of like the lackadaisical genius and he's coming up with shit, whereas Mayuri's constantly got his shoulders over the desk, cranking out numbers, experimenting. So yeah, when I read that line, I immediately thought of his relationship and dynamic with Urahara. Jesus,
Oh, you've been saying Uryu a lot, so I was a little like confused, honestly.
Thank God.
No, okay, now that makes so much. You were constantly saying Uryu. In fact, when you meant Urahara, oh my God, everything you were just saying makes so much more sense right now. I'm sorry, I should have said something earlier. Because I was sitting here thinking like, wait, do Kurotsuchi and Uryu really have that much going on after this? After their fight?
No, it's Urahara. Jesus Christ!
That makes so much more sense.
I have an excuse. They both start with you guys. Don't.
I mean, you did it before. I should have corrected you because maybe that would have averted this travesty that just happened. It's not
okay,
bad.
so now that we know which character I'm actually talking about, I mean, do you kind of see where I'm going with it? And again,
Urahara is their dynamic. I mean, he's the only one that we know of who could create the Hogyoku, right? Like,
yes, exactly,
Aizen is really smart. He can't replicate it. Kurotsuchi is really smart. He can't replicate it, right? Urahara, that makes sense. It's this natural genius that, like, Kurotsuchi is sort of evoking some of that resentment and contempt, but doing it through Uryu instead of Urahara, right? Because he obviously Urahara's like, gone. Even outside of the, fucking when Kurotsuchi's men saw Rukia's Gigai that Urahara made, I almost did it myself. I almost called him Uryu.
Their names are too similar, I'm telling you, man.
They're not similar at all. They just start with the same two letters.
Okay, that's similar to me.
Enough.
Okay?
That's enough. I did it too. I'm not almost, but it's funny. Kurotsuchi's men, who in theory would like see a lot of Kurotsuchi's awesome breakthroughs and amazing developments, see this one Gigai, like they haven't fucking talked or heard of Urahara in literal years, and they're like, oh shit, this Gigai is amazing, dude, what the hell, how did someone make this? No one here at Soul Society could have made this. Like, Kurotsuchi's just sitting, imagine him sitting there just like seething, pissed off that Urahara doesn't have all these men, all this technology, all this resources, and he's still able to pull off shit like he made this guy in a cave with a box of scraps, right? And it's still better than anything Kurotsuchi. Fuck me, I haven't thought about that before. That's really good actually.
I'm glad I remember that. I didn't take any notes. I need to take not only more notes, but I need to take better notes from now on, especially now.
We need to take a college fucking course on Bleach. That's what we need to do. Exactly. Jesus Christ.
I'm glad that because we were talking about me not liking the picture reminded me of the fight again, and I remembered that what I thought of in that quote. So that's good. I'm sure there are other scenes wwhere I thought something cool and I just didn't fucking write it down, and I need to be better.
Did you remember your other gripe or another one that you had? Because you framed it as if you had multiple, and then you only shared the one.
This other, again, they're both very minor. So that one I would categorize as the most major I had out of the two. But even that is very minor because, again, that's a very small scene from the fight as a whole. It doesn't ruin the fight whatsoever. So it is what it is. It took me out of the moment for all of a minute. So, fine. Another one that's even more minor is with it's literally just how Kubo initially draws what's her name? Matsuri, the hot girl, big boobies.
Isn't it Kukaku? You mean Ganji's older sister or someone else? Rangiku?
Rangiku. Thank you. Rangiku. I don't know if you noticed this.
You said big boobies. It's like that narrows it down.
Two characters, but I guess Orihime, but we're not going to say his name. But I don't know if maybe you completely disagree, but the way she is first drawn is so ugly. It's like it looks so wrong. I don't think that's even unique to her. Like, if you look at the spread of all the captains, like a lot of them don't like. He kind of, and that's honestly kind of normal because I feel like the manga, like if. Almost every manga evolves their art, I think. It's like at least when it's their first series. Like I just read a series called Ayakashi Triangle, which is the author's like third manga, and it's very consistent the whole way through. But in Bleach's case, it's like
Kubo,
yeah.
I'd say this is the reading where he really like finds his style. I think,
and
I think
there's a subtle change between
yes.
the beginning of Soul Society and the ending of Soul Society.
Well,
And
yeah,
you can
it's
clearly
amazing.
tell
It's
it with
honestly,
her.
it's honestly amazing how much change happens in literally 8 volumes. Like that's like what, a couple of years of writing, or no, not even a couple of years. Like not even like maybe a little maybe. I didn't count the chapters.
Yeah, like a year and a half, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's like it's kind of it really is impressive just how much he changes. But yeah, not just Rangiku, but I think if you look closely at that 2-page spread of all the captains, Kenpachi looked really weird when he showed up last reading.
That's true.
I didn't mention that.
Yeah.
But I did notice it because it's like, what? Get away from me! But again, that's so normal with manga authors, and that's that's just like go look back to early One Piece and look at Usopp. He's terrifying.
That's super. That's more egregious, honestly, way more egregious than the Rangiku stuff.
So yeah, I understand it, but I hadn't really thought about it because it's so normal to me, I guess, with a lot of like long-running manga by newer authors, because it evolves and changes so much that it's kind of
it is normal for me, but I don't know why it was so profound to me, especially remembering how she looked the last time we saw her compared to like later on in this reading where we have that flashback with her and Gin, and she wakes up and now it's like the Rangiku I remember is like back. Like just we see her again here and she's like, oh, she's back. Yeah, she's okay. This is what I'm used to. Because it's literally one panel. We see her initial design. It's her introduction. We don't see her for a long time until this scene. And then it's boom. Okay. You can clearly, from comparing these two things, you can clearly tell Kubo has changed his art style a little bit. His art style is getting more and closer to where it ends up. But yeah, you mentioned Kenpachi. I also did. I also recognized that, but yeah, I didn't mention it either because I don't know. But I don't know why with her it stuck with me so much. I don't know why. Because even Kenpachi changes, even in this. His look.
For sure.
Even by the end of this, he looks he looks a little bit different than he did even in
the page towards the end where he's like getting out of bed with Orihime right there, and he's fucking huge, like Jesus Christ. He's so, I love Kenpachi.
He's great. I love him even more too because his build is so I don't necessarily want to say it's funny, but it's like it's cool because it's like it's his more slender build, but he's like this really strong guy, but he's also really tall. I don't know. I like his build is really cool. I like.
Yeah, he's not like super muscular, even though he's the strongest, right? Like they easily could have gone that route, but it didn't happen. Though I was gonna say, because we were talking about the humor last time, and it's still funny. Like there's a couple of gags that I like. I think some of my favorite ones were I like when after Ichigo and wow, I forgot his name. Ganryu? Yeah, I forgot his name. Ganju. Fuck. I forgot his name. Holy shit. When they finished their fights with Ikaku and Yumichika, and like Ganju's like, oh, there you are, Ichigo, and Ichigo's like got a fucking 3 dozen guys chasing him, and just the way he's drawn in like the super deformed kind of style, it's so funny. I also like the one with Nanao and Kyoraku, Shunsui. Where he has a cool introduction with all the petals going down, and then you see it's like, no, she's literally up. Nanao is literally up there dropping flower petals, and he's like, no, stop, and then he gets buried in the flower petals because she just kind of hates him, and it's so good.
The comedy has not. I'm so surprised the comedy hasn't fallen off, albeit it's more few and far between. And when I say few and far between, I don't mean it's like rare. It's just because there's so much more serious shit and battles going on. But anytime Kubo can, he will put in humor, and it always hits. I had forgotten how funny Bleach was. And even
the other one I like is real quick is when Orihime gets the Soul Reaper outfits, and like that's funny because she's like, I'm so strong, and then she gets in the very well, unfortunate, and then like she's like, oh, she like starts changing, and Urio's like, wait, hold on, shouldn't we're a guy and a girl, shouldn't there be privacy? And she's like, okay, here you go, you get the change in the corner, and he's like, something's wrong about this should be the other way around. Like it's so silly. That,
it's like the frilly sign postage. It's like shame free or whatever. Embarrassment free zone. It's like all of it is just a mockery. It's so funny.
Oh boy.
Almost like, bro, you shouldn't even mention anything. Come on, bro. No, it's so funny, and even like I mean that reminds me. Hey, more Uryu and Ichigo acting quite alike. It's the same with like Yoruichi, where
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
because she's she's like stripping down. He's like, no, stop, and then like even in the even in the next panel, we see his eyes aren't complete. He's not completely covering his eyes.
That's like I love that gag every time it happens. It's so
Yeah,
funny
oh,
because it's
so
like
good.
they're putting on airs about not wanting to look, but they can't look away. And then of course he
Yes.
turns into a cat, and he's like, "What? Are you disappointed?" And he's like,
And he's legitimately
"No."
disappointed.
Lion ass motherfucker. God. Yeah. No, it's just it's so good.
Yeah, the comedy do still be hitting for sure, and I'm wondering if that ever falls off. I feel like it does, but that might just be me misremembering it egregiously because I
Yeah, I don't
expected it
know.
to already have been falling off, and it is not falling off whatsoever. Every time there's an
Yeah,
opportunity, the other
I feel like it's
Kudo
definitely
does
just that it
it, and it
becomes
lands.
more like less frequent and maybe less memorable for that because I kind of I don't like I wouldn't have been maybe some of the ones in the substitute Soul Reaper arc, but I feel like just from memory before we started Bleach, I don't think I would have been able to remember any of the jokes, right? Just because it's like not that they're not good, but it's just like that it's just when I think about Bleach, it's just not what immediately comes to mind,
That's
right? And
true. That's
yeah,
true. Yeah.
because I was even going to compare it because it's like, well, we both really like One Piece. I like Gintama, but you really like Gintama, and these are both
Yeah.
series that have that you could call them comedies, right? Like I feel, even though ultimately they're action series, especially Gintama more so. I think you could call that one a comedy, but it's just so important to both of those. Bleach doesn't have any gag fights, right? I don't
Mm.
remember like the closest is like the Don Kanoji stuff, but even then, like it still has very serious moments in there.
Yeah.
Like it never has a fight that's like Luffy versus Foxy, right? Where it's largely a vehicle for jokes. I don't think Bleach ever does that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
We could heck,
just an
if
observation there.
Colin had a final fight in Thousand Year Blood
That
War,
would be
we could have had
amazing. Fucking
what
Buff
could have
Khan just
been.
beating the shit out of a Quincy. Yeah,
Yeah,
Kubo, you betrayed us all and let us all down.
true. Fuck Chad, bro. Give me a Colin final fight. Jesus Christ.
Oh
Like he
god,
got buffed
because
for no
now
reason, man. He gets buffed for no
now I'm
reason.
just imagining him like drawing Buff Khan in a serious way, and that just making it funnier. Because it's like, oh,
Exactly.
this buff strong character, but it's just got the lion plush head. But anyway, just to prove that we're not I mean, I feel like you said that you're running out of things to talk about, relatively that you wanted to bring up specifically.
In terms of like the stuff I wrote down, literally like the last thing I
Okay.
have is just kind of like a whatever statement. When I was reading some of the final stuff in this episode, I thought it was really cool that Momo she's not reading Aizen's words to her. She's like reciting it all, and which tells you that like she's just been rereading it, rereading it, and rereading it, and not it doesn't just tell me that like this is really important to her and like this is really devastating, but it also will tell you like she was probably trying to tell herself the entire time like it can't be true, it can't be Hitsugaya, right? Like it can't be Toshido,
Mm-hmm.
like not Toshido, because even in the flashback, and this is more of Kubo being Kubo, and why I love Bleach so much is because, albeit in this instance, it's pretty clear given what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
We get the little flashback, and in the beginning, you see little Toshiro, and I guess the implication is by him saying like, "Oh, see a bedwetter" is like, "Oh, they live together, but they're not related by blood, but they did the whole thing that." We see in Rukia and Renji's flashback where, no, even before that, when the gang first enters the Soul Society, we're getting a breakdown of like the Rukongai and how like they all form surrogate families. So I think the
Mm-hmm.
implication there in that little flashback with
Yeah, oh,
Momo
yeah.
is that
Um,
like they formed a surrogate family together uh,
yeah.
in Rukongai.
Well, I was
So
even
that's
thinking about
cool.
that from the comment, like because apparently strawberry flower also means I don't know if it's flower language or the kanji, but happy family. And they
Mm,
literally talked about how all these characters are gathering this flower. Like Soul Society is a family. Ichigo is part of that family. Like Ichigo he has his own blood family, but like obviously these friends that he fights with, he cares about them so much that they're also part, like it's all one big family, right? So yeah. I like that because at this point, we see because
because it makes I don't know, because the only reason I mention is because it makes it more impactful when I think of Momo even being able to recite the words on the letter to her, is because I'm thinking about it more in the vein that, oh, she's like rereading it over and over again because she can't believe that Toshiro would be an enemy that would kill Aizen, her beloved Aizen, and obviously Hitsugaya knows that how much she loves Aizen. And so, like, the thought of him doing that to her when they were, family, right, is just insane.
Yes, and like the way she fucking what is the line she says I don't know what I'm doing when she's fucking crying.
Yeah, exactly.
Like God,
it's so good. Like
Aizen sure knows how to twist a fucking knife.
More of the stuff in Soul Society that I just like, because honestly, I remember reading that in the first time and thinking like, yeah, it's pretty decent. But now I read it, I'm like, oh, this is like super tense and super like I'm feeling something like this. Like Momo, I love this character. I fucking love this character. Like Jesus, like this is super sad. And I'm glad I can feel more for these little scenes that I didn't as much before. And even the fucking Ganju fight now because of you, and it's
yeah.
cool.
Well, actually, so I was just scrolling through, and I mean, we haven't talked about Ichigo versus Renji yet, which we really should because it's probably the most important fight we haven't talked about at all, and Renji in general. But before that, there's another minor fight because it's the one with Orihime and Uryu versus Jirobo, the who I only know because I literally see it right. The super minor Soul Reaper character who literally never shows up in a major role again. And well, because he talks about regret a lot, and I was just like, oh, it clicked for me because like Orihime tries to attack him with Tsubaki and it doesn't work, right? Because like she's not a violent person, and as someone who is so compassionate and wants to help and heal people, even her enemies, like she doesn't, by fighting she creates something that she would regret, right? And so she's not able to do that. But then Jirobo himself isn't a person who because he doesn't have integrity, right? Like he tries to attack Orihime when she's basically a non-combatant at that point. Like she's not fighting, like it's one-on-one at that point, but he still goes after Orihime. He tries to run away. Like he doesn't feel regret at all, which is why he's able to act without integrity. And so that's basically how Uryu's able to defeat him, or like ideologically, because Uryu does have his pride and things to hold on to that he does try to live without regret, and that's also, you can argue, that ties into his with Kurotsuchi, where he's like, yes, this is worth it to use all of my power to fight this one guy, right?
Yeah.
Because he doesn't want to lose to this person who is just a horrible piece of shit, right?
Yeah,
like
I did pick up on the regret thing, but I didn't extend it to his fight with Kurotsuchi, so that is cool. Yeah, nice.
Yes, so so I just want to say that just before I forgot, because I was just scrolled through it again, and I was like, oh right, that's what it was about. So I wanted to share it just in case someone, because it was one of those minor fights, so there was a level at which maybe you skim by it. I don't know.
No, yeah, that one I picked up on a little bit of the subtlety, but again, no, you still illuminated something new because I hadn't quite extended it that far yet, which is good. Cool. But the Renji stuff, I'm interested in that because I actually, in the video that I talk a lot about Renji actually, even in that I talk about Soul Society in my Rescue Arc video. I talk about the Substitute Shinigami and Soul Society, and I talk a lot about Renji from my recollection in that video, but I don't remember a lot of what I say, honestly. So I'm wondering if any of my observations are just the same thing I've already said in that video. But yeah, what were you gonna? What do you have to say?
Because my thing with Renji, or are we moving on to Renji? Is that
did you have another minor fight? I thought that was
no, that was it. That was the only one that I remember that we didn't talk about.
Okay, yeah.
But and you were talking about Renji, so it's because again, I don't think I'm getting that much new out of it, but I also talk about Renji's stuff, and I talk about his whole character arc in my I have a video on Ruki and Renji, because what I noticed about them is that I think I talked about last time how they have like sort of inverse character arcs, and you can kind of see Ichigo inspiring like that change in Renji, go, because at the end of the reading he's gonna join Ichigo and train on his own to fight Byakuya. And also, his fear of being weak and not willing to move for what he wants. Let me look at my notes again. If you have some observations you want to make while I do that,
I think a lot of the cooler observations that I think are more new that I had. I actually said last time we were mentioning Renji a lot, and I think I mentioned that you could say the reason why Renji wasn't able to let go of his fear and sort of allow his camaraderie with Rukia motivate him to go and rescue her against everything and against the system is because, at least as far as we know, that sort of light has been absent in his life for so long. Like Rukia has been doing her own thing. She went with the Kuchiki family, and he made a regretful action to just kind of silently, not even silently condone it, but he actively encouraged it without so much as a word of like, oh, hey, what does this mean for like our future? Like, you're still going to be around. And I think the implication is that they don't really interact that much after this point. So what I was saying last time essentially is this could literally just be that like Ichigo was fresh off interacting with Rukia constantly and building this very strong bond. Whereas Renji's bond with Rukia has only been, has not been severed, but it's been kind of torn to a substantial degree, to the point where it enabled his fear to kind of to kind of blind him from what he always wanted and needed to do. Even all the way back then in that flashback, what he wanted to do was like, probably ask Rukia like how she felt, what this meant for them and their dynamic together, all this stuff, right? But instead he just kind of like silently encouraged it, which was not true to what he was actually feeling inside. And this idea of fear, by the way, is something that you've definitely picked up on. I would assume too. Is like it's as equally amongst Byakuya as it is Rukia as it is Renji. They all deal with different fears, but it all comes down to fear brought upon by the rigid system that is the Soul Society. They all suffer from it in a different way, but they all suffer from it all the same, right? So that's about all because all the other stuff I think is rather obvious if you just watch the fight. I mean, Renji even explicitly states some of his woes in regards to Rukia even in the fight itself. So yeah, what were you going to say though?
I mean, some other just things to point out, because so one of his lines, he calls himself a stray dog barking at the moon. I think in this case, so Byakuya would probably I guess would be the moon in that case of like, because he wants to pierce the moon, right? He wants to rival, but he's afraid of him, right? Another thing I noticed about that though is because so he's framed himself as a dog, and his Zanpakuto, his spirit, Zabimaru, is a monkey. Well, it's a Nue, because it has a snake tail. But apparently dogs and monkeys have a rivalry. I've mostly remember that as a kid in learning about that through fucking Metabots or some children's anime that
maybe form of education.
Exactly. But like I just remember them talking, like at least how they explained it in the show was something about how like dogs and monkeys have a rivalry because a dog was actually the first animal in space, not a monkey or something like that. And that's how they explain it in the show. But maybe I don't know where else I've seen it, but I feel like it probably runs a bit deeper than that. But I just thought about how like
they're both really close to the moon when they're in space.
Oh yeah, the space, yeah.
They're both.
Well, especially I was
well, I was thinking about how like. Byakuya, bro, oh my god.
So Renji, he has a Bankai, but it's not his like complete Bankai. It takes a completely different shape in Thousand Year Blood War when he completes his character arc, right? So he basically he's at odds with his own sword in a sense. Like, and I even think I remember breaking down the dialogue he has in the prison cell because like I think let me look at it again because it's like.
Who is your enemy then, right? Like, he's
but also I just feel like I think the snake had angrier dialogue towards Renji because there's a level at which like Renji doesn't accept himself, right? So on some level, like he's agreed with his sword, like the monkey, so that's why he's able to use a Bankai, but it's not complete. He has to like fully accept him, and understand himself basically. And I guess tying that
his Bankai in this arc, it mimics a lot more of the snake characteristic, right?
Yes, which is interesting because I think the snake was the one who doesn't accept him, and yet his Bankai shows that shape. When later on it's maybe more. Well, the other interesting part, I guess, because again, his arc is about like finding the courage to take a step for what he wants instead of staying still out of fear, right, and not moving. And so his Bankai, it works because like his current Bankai, he's staying still, but he's lashing out with his sword, right? He's not. But in later on, his range is heavily reduced, so he has to move towards whatever he's fighting, right? Like literally. And Rukia sort of has the inverse, where when she gets her Bankai, because her fear is she fears staying too close to people, so she moves away, right? But her Bankai literally works because she has to move slowly, right? Like she can't run away. She has to stay still and stay in place, and instead of cutting off these bonds and retreating. Right. So just neat how those sort of symbols work. But I was also going to talk about his volume poem a bit because just sort of how it drives home his perception of himself, I guess, because it like the first or let me find where'd it go? I had it. So light a fire to the fang that cannot be reached is the first line, which I took as like fang cannot be reached just reeks of like his goals that he can't like accomplish, like fighting Byakuya, right? And there's even like the Fang in the Moon is him fighting Byakuya or even surpassing him, but like the Fang can't be reached, right? So but then but I guess like the way because fire would create light, because the next two lines are so that I do not have to see that star. So that I do not slit this throat. So like if there's a fire, he can't see the star, which would be Rukia, his goal, his desire, something he wants to like next to the moon in the sky as well. But he can't reach the star because he won't try and surpass the moon basically. And then but then it's also like so that I do not slit this throat. Like he's that's fucking like suicidal thoughts basically, right? Like and he does even like with Ichigo, he's literally like prepared to die rather than face his fear, right? Like which is just an awful mindset to have for him, and he doesn't die, so he's able to actually like overcome that and start down his character arc pretty much. But just I don't know, unpacking Renji a bit because I hadn't really thought about the poem that much before.
Yeah,
but,
no, it very much symbolizes the exact progression he goes through in Soul Society, which is that Ichigo through fighting Ichigo, he recognizes. Well, I mean, there's more than just that. Than just Ichigo being someone who can do all these things that Renji hasn't been able to. It's more than that because Ichigo has just freshly known Rukia, whereas Renji was with Rukia for most of his childhood and through into adulthood. Ichigo is a lot younger than him. There's so many things that Ichigo it should be. From Renji's perspective, it should just be like this insane wake up call, because it's like this should be me. Like I should be Ichigo, because I've experienced so much more with Rukia. Yet this fucking kid is doing all of this and is he's not even thinking about the fear. But again, it goes into that whole thing I was talking about earlier, which is I think a lot of it has to do with fear born from, because everyone always says Ichigo constantly is battling fear. It's not like in this arc, through fighting Urahara and through the lesson Urahara taught him and through remembering that lesson, he's automatically eclipsed his fear for the rest of the series, right? Fear is a constant battle. Every character is always is always. I mean, there's literally a whole character in Thousand Year Blood War associated with fear. And of course, who does he fight? Fights Byakuya and Rukia, which I can't wait till we get to that, because I have some cool things to say about that. But
I mean, I'm excited for more Bleach. It's because Soul Society's good, but Arrancar and Thousand Year Blood War and Full Bring, it's let's go. But anyway, keep going.
But it's this idea of what is the one thing that can assert fear, and that is courage. But courage doesn't come from the nether. Courage doesn't just come up because you will it to come up. Courage has a very meaningful source, and the only thing substantial enough at least to assert fear is courage brought on through this shared power of unity, this camaraderie, right? It's very shonen, but it's very beautiful all the same. And again, I think the sole reason Renji isn't able to do the exact same thing Ichigo is doing is because that connection he's had with Rukia has been so, estranged for so long, right? They've been separated for far too long. But here comes Ichigo to remind him of the strength of that connection, right? And that reinvigorates him. So I think it's cool. This idea of fear and courage that's constantly brought on, that every character faces.
So this isn't something that I had this message to me a while ago, and I just held on to it, but I kept it in my notes, so I'm going to share it. This is from the one in white, who she said, I'm just going to read it verbatim because I happen to have it. So one thing I noticed was about Chad and Uryu's relationship that may or may not get expanded on, because admittedly, Chad and Uryu didn't get a ton of focus throughout the series. Obviously, there's a tiger and dragon thing with their names to step aside and explain that, like Ryu meaning dragon, and I think it's Yasutora or Tora meaning tiger. But I reread it and I was like, oh yeah, no, he does have tiger Tora in his name. So I forgot about that. But as well as when they're at Urahara's, Chad said that Uryu is probably the most fragile out of all of us. And when crossing the Dangai, Chad is the one who saves Uryu from getting stuck. So maybe it's like two characters naturally opposed to each other are shown to get along really well. So to explain what that means, if tiger and dragon symbolism, basically the dragon is a symbol of imperial rule, or to reduce it a bit more, it's like the one who's at the top or the superior one, and the tiger is the one who challenges the dragon. Probably the most clear example that you are sure to know of is that who challenges the heavenly dragons, fish or tiger, right? Like a slave, a fishman rises up and is able to like fuck up Marijoa and challenge the heavenly dragons, and it's pretty recurrent symbolism. I've definitely seen it in a few other things, and I mentioned it in some of my videos as well. But I just hadn't thought about how their names evoke tiger and dragon. But
isn't that literally a thing in like Toradora, right? Like the two names.
No, that's what the title is. Tiger Dragon. That's literally what Toradora means. I haven't watched it yet, but yes, I've heard that. And
because the main character's name is like Ryu something.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. I don't know what the girl's name is, but I imagine there's Tora, and I've seen her with like cat ears and stuff. So okay, that's a good example. And I'm trying to think of what are some other big examples where I feel like it comes. I can't think of any big ones. It's more minor stuff. But it's definitely a recurring thing I've seen several times. And yeah, generally like and you can even just read it. I mean, hell, another example that shows up in One Piece is the four emperors after Wano you can actually tie their colors to the four cardinal beasts in Chinese mythology, and Luffy's the white tiger, basically, in that analog. So he's a tiger who's going to fight the dragons, right? So, which is an interesting observation. But, so just, I don't know, something that's more just like throwing that out there to think about it, because that's definitely, I had never really focused on Chad and Uryu and how they sort of like respond to each other in a sense, and just I'm
going to be paying more attention, because I never really think about their dynamic, because I honestly, from my recollection, there isn't much of one, but I'll be thinking of that more from here on to see. The only thing I can remember is, other than like Uryu and Ichigo, is like Uryu and Renji, because I know they like share an adversary in Huakamunda.
Yes. So okay. No. Yeah. There's like, that's the thing, is like, it's just there's so much to Bleach. It's so it's but anyway, I feel like I'm just gonna look through my notes again and see if there's anything else I have to bring up, because I feel like the discussion's winding down.
I'm gonna start taking notes. I feel like these discussions are gonna go a lot better on my end. I feel like you're probably carrying this a little bit too much, because I think it's because you've been more diligent than I have. And also, I think you've been a little bit sharper on some of these, and I think that is also to do with I've been a little bit too liberal in my pace on reading a lot of this. I have been, to my detriment, reading this shit way too fast. So I need to slow it down, and that'll definitely be way easier to do now that we're going to be doing this, once every other week from now on.
So yeah, my reason is that because I literally also do another podcast in which I read manga, and obviously this podcast isn't just going to be manga. It just happens to be manga right now and for the immediate future. But I just don't want to be, because like what happened last week is I had to record. I already did the reading, luckily, but I still had to edit 2 podcasts in a week, so I didn't have as much time to do other stuff. I'm basically I'm going to stagger it, so I alternate. So basically every week that I'm not doing the Nen show, I'll be doing this discussion.
Cool.
So I'll
Cool.
be reading Bleach and
Yeah.
to talk about it. So because that's why that's why, because so this one will come out pretty close to the last one. Because I'm gonna put it out the Sunday. We're recording this on Tuesday, like I did the day after the first one came out. So and then it should be every 2 weeks from that. So yeah.
Yeah. And I will, guys, I will be better from here on. I promise. I will
so
be better.
One thing I noticed that you'll appreciate, because it ties to some things you were talking about with Uryu, is that, well, I realized that the art, because his body is paralyzed, right? So he's not, and he's able to overcome that with it uses like a Quincy art that uses his body like a puppet by like moving it with strings. It's a power about control, right? Like which, and that about like dominant. That kind of ties to what you were talking about with why Ryuken avoid, or I think avoids, isn't what he would have to give up to fall in with the Quincy's.
With the Quincy's, the autonomy, yeah. Oh my god, yeah.
So,
like the lack of, literally. Nice. I'm glad you picked up on that.
And something I was getting on to add earlier is because another example of like Squad 11 sort of like not understanding Kenpachi, because I mentioned how Orihime calls him Zaraki instead, and the one guy in Squad 11 who it was so funny when he like because Uryu was like, take her away, and he like picked up Orihime and like karate chopped her on the neck to knock her out, and she just has a funny expression. I just thought
little comedic effect, yeah.
Yeah, but I was gonna say head trauma is funny. No, anyway, but more that like, because Kenpachi is a title, right? Like, and I guess if Squad 11 is so insistent on calling him Kenpachi, it's a way to respect his strength. And maybe there's even a fear that, like, if they don't call him that, like, he won't like that. But in reality, he doesn't give a shit, right? Or he may calling him Zaraki is perfectly fine. Like, he doesn't mind. And he was impressed by her because she just did it naturally. But it's an example of, like, as Ryoka, they're able to offer this new perspective to Soul Society because they're so stagnant, right? So just so many little ways that it shows up is really cool.
Yeah.
And then like
even in this section in retrospect, looking at Aizen and Ichigo, it's like Aizen's whole plan is to make this substantial change himself, whereas Ichigo is so much invokes so much more impactful change that lasts for the Soul Society through his invasion here, where it's not independent of Aizen, because Aizen is actively initiating his plan, and it's a part of the reason why Soul Society is in such upheaval, because this would have been easily dealt with had Aizen's interference not been a factor. But the fact that it's so cool to see that, like, later on, the accomplishments Ichigo makes for the progression of the Soul Society is when Aizen always looked at Ichigo as just one more of his deliberate, planned out, experiments, right? Where always Aizen looked at Ichigo as something he created and something that he always knew would where Ichigo would end up. Whereas Ichigo essentially does the very thing Aizen was trying to do, obviously on a softer. It's a softer change, but eventually it even seeps into Aizen himself by the end of the series, where that change, that slow and steady change, reveals itself to Aizen too, and Aizen understands the beauty of it and acknowledges it.
Yes. No, I was thinking about it when talking about how, like, there's the, respect your enemy aspect to the Nietzsche philosophy, and just how, like, Aizen and Ichigo do have this mutual respect for each other. That's really cool. By the end of in the 1,000-Year Blood War. One other thing I did forget, because I wrote down while I was editing the podcast, there was something I started to explain and then forgot. In the Don Kanoji arc, It opens with with Ichigo being like, horoscopes, they're not real. I can't see them. And I brought up a brief comparison to Ulquiorra, how he only believes, he doesn't believe in that which can, basically that which humans make up. And I was just thinking about horoscopes and how like they are made up, but like what we kind of see at the end is that like, well, Ichigo's came true, right? So it's like there's a level of like, you know, these things that humans come up with. They do matter in a way, right? Like that they're valuable, or they can be rather. So it's just, I guess, like, you know, I just want to directly state what because I got lost in the weeds last time, as I'm ought to do. So I just wanted to make sure I brought that up and just like, you know, bring that.
That's good that you remembered. Yeah, cool.
I edited the podcast, so.
Thank you for that, by the way.
Yes. All right, so yeah, thank you for listening. I almost said thank you for reading. I don't know what you're reading. Read Bleach. That's
you
idea,
better be rereading with us, actually. Yeah, thank you for reading, guys. Be rereading with us. Yeah, it's an obligation, actually. Because you got to write some cool shit in the comments that we don't mention.
Please, I need it. I want it, even if it feels obvious, because I think, you know, because I you know, even if it's obvious to us from having our third read through the series, like maybe it's not obvious to everyone else, or even one other person, right? You know, so like I even said some things that I feel like, yeah, HotBoySpicy probably got this already, but just in case, right? Like, and even that, like, I think one example was talking about regret in the one minor fight with the minor Soul Reaper is like, you know, even if you'd already understood that, there was still something more to connect it to, that like that one smaller thing, right? So I just think it's
exactly,
yeah. So that's
and every little bit counts. Every little bit counts,
exactly,
for sure.
But anyway, so yeah, thank you everybody for listening, and we will see you next time.
Peace out, guys.